Live from the Talking Joe Studios.
It's Talking Joe.
They seem normal.
Hey. Welcome to Talking Joe live stream, looking at original art again. And today we are very excited because we have a special guest with an incredible collection. It is Chuck Costas. And joining me to talk about it will be Tim Finn. So I'm going to put him into the stream. Here's Tim. Yeah, there we go.
Hello, Mark, and hello, streamers. Is that the word for people watching this? Hello, live streamers and
the internets.
People watching
all of the
this
internets.
After. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Now, Chuck might not realize this, but on this show, when we have a special guest, I have to make a jingle for them. And here's Chuck's.
This guy, Chuck. This guy, Chuck. We're in luck. He's no schmuck. It's this guy, Chuck.
Wow.
Here he is.
That
This guy,
amazes
Chuck.
me. I think we just end the show there. That's it. Disco Duck, one of my favorite Rick D songs. You're going way back there from back in the day.
Good memory, yeah.
Yes, and that picture that you found of me with the Wookiee, also very nice. But
What a Wookiee.
We're talking Joe today, though. We're talking Joe
exactly.
Today.
Yes, and specifically your amazing collection. A few highlights. From what it selecting the highlights must have been a task, because I know that you've got an incredible selection. And just looking even behind you, it's a museum.
Yeah, all stuff we don't have time to talk about all this today, but I figured I would decorate for the occasion today and sort of make sure that my wife is out of town, so I could do whatever I want with the basement.
Go crazy.
Today,
so. If I zoom in on you, Chuck, maybe you can just give a few seconds guided tour of what is actually behind you there, because it is super cool.
Sure. I'll start. I guess it's reverse over here. I'll start over in this corner, which is I also, aside, I guess my day job is I work for a company called Prop Store. I was a consultant for many years, and after I sort of left that career, I decided, what do I really want to do? I moved out. I'd already moved out to LA and said I'd love to be in the movie prop business, and so. Prior to that, though, I was a customer, and one of the auctions that Prop Store held was the G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra auction a few years ago. So I, despite what people think of the movie, I think people love it and hate it relative to it. But for me, it was just a great way of translating the G.I. Joe world into the real world. And I have a few different swords. These are from both Rise of Cobra as well as Retaliation, Storm Shadow, and then two different swords from Snake Eyes there. A couple of the Neo Viper helmets, as well as one of the bombs, one of the Mars bombs there that Storm Shadow launches, and you remember with the nanomites inside there. So very, very cool. And then over there in the corner is also Snake Eyes, the Arctic version of Snake Eyes, sort of reminiscent of G.I. Joe 2. And then over in the other corner, we've got the Scarlet costume, and then one of the Mars briefcases that held the nanobombs inside there. So for those that are movie fans, and also decked out today in one of the jackets from the movie as well. How better way to enjoy movie props and costumes than to wear them around. So, but if anybody else wants there, I think we do actually have some on propstore.com. So if you're a Joe fan and you want one of these, there's a little plug. Yeah, Tim?
Chuck, do you have your tickets for Snake Eyes, and what clothing will you wear to that movie?
I don't think I'm going to be wearing a Snake Eyes costume. It's a little bit form-fitting, and I've eaten a few too many pies as of lately. But I don't know. We'll have to see. I might just go as a normal guy. I don't know. I'm looking forward. I heard great things about the new Snake Eyes film, so really looking forward to seeing what's going on with that. And then in the background, you'll see some artwork. We'll talk more about my relationship with Mike Zeck over the years. But, one of the things I had the pleasure of doing as being one of the original G.I. Joe art collectors is I met Mike Zeck back in 1986 and started buying G.I. Joe covers from him, because that was really my favorite thing to do. Nobody else seemed to want them at the time. And so month to month, Mike would just offer me different covers, and as he was drawing them. And in fact, I would talk to him over the phone, and he would tell me what was on the drawing board that day. And I remember G.I. Joe Special Missions 1, when that was coming out, he was sort of describing coming over the ship and what he was drawing there. So some special memories in that, but some covers that I acquired from Mike over the years. The G.I. Joe 39, the 52, I can't really see all these things because you have to go to the reverse angle here on things, but I will get out of the way. So you got the 39, the 52, and then you've got Special Missions 2 and Special Missions 4 when I switched over to the other side. And then a very special piece, which is the G.I. Joe Yearbook number 3. And we'll talk also, hopefully we can talk a little bit more about the exhibit of Mike Zeck art that I'm going to be helping to host later on this year at the Ringling College of Art and Design. That's going to be starting on October 18th through December 10th, 2021. So if you get a chance to be in Sarasota, Florida, you can see all those pieces live, as well as a whole host of other G.I. Joe art. And it's actually Hasbro is officially sort of giving us the license to show these things. So I think it's a great opportunity for Joe fans as well as fans of Mike Zeck to see some great artwork that Mike's done over the years.
Excellent. And yeah, if you ever want to see the cover that features the first appearance of everyone's favorite character, Sarawak Sally, then that's the cover. We just discussed the latest issue, which I don't know if you've read it yet, Chuck, but features the return of a character only ever seen in Special Missions 4, and not.
I did not know that they were going into the Wayback Machine on that, but those October Guard stories were always some of my favorite ones. And that was I always just loved the cover on that, the upside down, being caught in a tree, and I just thought the angle on that particular one was pretty spectacular. But anyway, that's what's in the room today. It will not be there later today, and when my wife gets home, it'll be back the way it was.
I have a kickoff question, which is, what is the first piece of comic art that you bought, and how did you sort of come to that decision had there been collectors in your family? Was this the natural outgrowth from comics, or where and what and how?
Yeah, I guess, sort of painting the picture, and I'm sure folks that are watching this may have similar experiences. I grew up in Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is right outside Washington, D.C.
Me too.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that, Tim. And I think the culture in D.C., we had a great comic book, or I guess convention schedule that was going on. Every month you could go to. There was pretty much 2 to go to. There was a Jubilee convention, and there was a Creation, because Creation was the third, and then there was Serendipity as well. So we really had 3 major conventions that were rotating through the DC area, whether you're on the Virginia side or the Maryland side, or sometimes occasionally in DC itself. But as part of that, they would always have guests there. And I think that was something that was maybe a little different than some of the other conventions around the country, is that we always had a plethora of guests. And so I'd always see people come through. We had John Romita Jr., we had Mike Zeck came through at some point, Ron Wilson. But at one point, I sort of struck up a conversation with Rich Rankin, who people may not know. He was the inker that was working with Bill Willingham on the Elementals, and really, got to know him and liked him, and decided that one day, I think it was 1985, to buy a piece of artwork. And it was the first piece I bought was an Elementals 2 page 1, which was, frankly, from an art collector's perspective, probably not the best page to buy. It was just a picture of the FBI Seattle building, no characters on it whatsoever. But I just thought it was so well drawn that, and it was just a great thing to put on the wall, that I had to say, that was the first piece. So it was, I think Rich was charging $10. I think he gave me a discount and sold it to me for $5. And that, but comic books at the time were 75 cents, 60 cents, something like that. So, it's still a little bit more than buying just a single comic book. So, that was my first investment, Tim. I mean, it was and I think it went from there, but for me, it was a bit early on. It was about creating a connection with the artists, because you couldn't really find, eBay wasn't around, and you couldn't find a real large selection of older art at these conventions. It was really comic books at those, and then whatever the artist of the day sort of brought with them, and then you'd have a chance to buy things from them.
I remember being confused at my third or fourth convention in 1990 that there was a dealer selling original art. It's like the cover to Wolverine number 21 or 22, right? Where it's all yellow and Wolverine's just arms are popping out of the Spore by John Byrne.
Yep.
And it was much larger than the comic, and it was black and white, and I just didn't understand. And it was in this, big leather portfolio, and it was familiar and foreign at the same time. It was sort of enchanting and a little off-putting and scary at the same time. And then it had a price on it, which I probably didn't understand, because probably a piece of tape on the top right that said something like 180. It's like, I don't understand this. None of these cues make sense to me. Like, what is this object, and why are people interested in it, and why do I want to get closer? But also, it's sort of weird.
Well, I think I was always a struggling artist as a kid. I think I figured out I liked to draw, and so I think I knew what it was, and I respected the fact that these, I knew there had to be a piece of art out there. Didn't know a lot about the creative process, and I guess collecting original art sort of helped educate me about how, that there could be a different penciler from an inker. There could be, theoretically a separate set of pencils from a separate set of inks, and then the colorists came in after the fact. And so understanding that process, I was educated. There weren't a lot of books on that stuff at the time. I think a little bit later on, how to draw. Well, I guess there was always How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which was sort of the classic John Buscema book out there. And I picked up a copy of that, and I think that really explained it to me. But I didn't pick that up probably until after I had discovered original artwork. And then there was the Marvel Tryout book that came out as well, so that you could see the large pages. It actually came with official sort of Marvel stamp pages. So if you wanted to try your hand at becoming an artist, that was the way in the 80s, I think, that most people sort of played out their dreams and could test their skills on whether or not they were a good enough artist to actually make it into the world of Marvel. I got one of those as a Christmas present one year, but I was just, as a collector, I was like, I don't want to actually touch any of the pages and mess it up. So I'll just leave it in mint condition. So it stayed intact, and but it was funny. Years later, as I was honing my skills, Mike Zeck decided, he would try to help me out, and I guess what he had done with other artists, and he was like, I will send you photocopies of the original pencils, so if you want to practice inking those. So he sent me the pencils to Punisher #1, and again, I was just kind of like, these kind of look nice as is. I don't know if I want to even get vellum out and start inking these things. So I still have the pencils, So thank you, Mike, and I have the sticky from the 90s, I think, when he sent those to me. But always a little bit of a reluctant artist, and never really got my portfolio together to show Marvel what I could do. But maybe one day.
The other change besides eBay or the internet, sort of people being familiar with comic art or having access to purchase it, there are many more places where comic art is displayed nowadays in museums and galleries. Whereas in the 80s, there were a few shows, or some art might get displayed, not just try to be sold at conventions. But I feel like it's pretty common nowadays, if you're near a certain college or university, a gallery in a major city, every year or two, there's going to be some kind of show that incorporates original comic art. If not, that is the show.
Yeah, and for those that may have gone to the Marvel Universe of Superheroes exhibit that's traveling the country, I think right now it's in Chicago, that is really the core focus. It shows movie props like the ones I have floating around here, side by side with the original artwork, showing sort of the origins of that, to give people greater insights into the creative process, and really the fact that this did exist, that there were artists behind this, there was somebody actually, sketching these things out to create these from a blank piece of paper. And that is really the core of the exhibit. And that's something I know I'm contributing some of my non-G.I. Joe stuff to that exhibit as it travels the country. But I've also heard, I'm here in Los Angeles, and there's a number of museums that are starting up this year. You've, of course, got the Academy Museum that's about to open, but you also have the Lucas Museum. And the Lucas Museum has come out and said that there will be a section dedicated to comic art. And I think that's really exciting, because they're really focused on telling the narrative story and sort of how that's evolved in different forms of that over the years. And obviously movies, and everybody expects to see, Indiana Jones and Star Wars there. But I think, if you hear the stories, obviously Norman Rockwell was a big influence on Lucas, but I think comic art was also one of the things he early on collected, but also took inspiration from. So it's going to be great to see what collection they have there. And of course, the Library of Congress, if you are in the Washington, D.C. area or can stop by there, has a pretty good selection that people have donated, including the original artwork to Amazing Fantasy 15, which is, frankly, it is a sort of a life-changing experience if you can hold all those pages in your hand of the first appearance of Spider-Man and just page through them and see all the changes that they've made. And I think that's what's crazy about original artwork is sometimes, and we'll see some pages here where the original concept was changed on the fly. We're not talking Transformers today, but if you look at the original art pages for Transformers #1, half those pages I have pages that have completely different dialogue, that have different scenes. They were changing it on the fly, and they were cutting the pages up and pasting things different down because they only had a month to really get that book out, and that the origins of the Transformers as well were created, by a group of folks over at Marvel. And I guess the original concepts didn't fly in some cases, so they had to change it around very quickly. And you'll see a lot of that with G.I. Joe in some of the pages we'll show today as well.
Great. I was gonna say, Chuck, I guess the focus of these kinds of live streams, we've done a few of these now, we've seen people's sort of sketches that they've had done at more on the fly at conventions, the quicker pieces. We've seen the sort of the commissions, and sometimes very ambitious big commissions, and we've seen original art, and then we've also seen things like production art and other sort of curiosities in the sort of G.I. Joe world. It seems like you've gravitated more towards I guess the original art that we'd see in the actual book, but perhaps would that be fair to say is that's kind of what you've gravitated towards in both your interest and your collections, that you've less sort of interested in going kind of down commission route?
I think I think my focus has been really those first 50 issues of G.I. Joe, because those are the ones that I devoutly read. I think after that it trickled off a little bit, as well as say the Mike Zeck. I guess Mike Zeck continued on to about issue 65 in the regular series, and then the 1 through 8 of the special mission series. So really, my relationship, I think, with Zeck in those sort of those middle 80s years was really sort of it became a tie to G.I. Joe. But over the years, I've also gotten to know, we'll talk about Herb Trimpe. I had a very, great relationship with Herb, and really was, glad to get to know him. And then Mike Vosberg, I've also been, I think you guys may have seen the Mike Vosberg live stream I did recently to help him sell some of his artwork. But Mike and I have known each other over 20 years as well, and just had some great friendships with these folks. So, it's odd being, when you have sort of deep relationships with folks, getting commissions from them is probably the last thing on your mind, because you see all the other people that really want to get commissions, and I feel like they should get them, because I've had the pleasure of really getting to know these people, and that's what they've given back to me. But I've really connected with those early Joe stories. And I guess when I assembled my collection was really looking at, when I started this, nobody really cared about the Joe artwork. Nobody really cared about those early things. And I went out of my way to go and find some of that stuff when nobody else was looking for it. And now I almost look at it as it's the history of the G.I. Joe characters, and the collection that I have really sort of helps tell the story of the early Joes, if you want to look at it that way. Now, I do have a couple pieces, and we'll talk about a couple pieces from later Joe artists, and I guess nothing as recent as the last even 10 years, but I do have an appreciation when I do see folks like David Michael Beck, who sort of put their own spin on drawing some of that, and I do think there's some great artists that are doing it. But as far as my collecting, I've had to sort of focus in my lane and stick with the early Joe quote unquote historic stuff, if you want to look at it that way.
Okay, great. It feels like we're ready to start looking at some art. I'll just say that if people want to send us comments, please do. We'll see those. And so if you've got any questions or comments as we're going along, please feel free to chuck them our way. So let's do this, and we'll get started. So
I like how you threw the Chuck in there. It goes nicely with your theme song. Yes.
Okay. Here we go. Here's number one.
Yeah. So, Tim, back to your question around sort of the original, sort of me starting with getting started collecting original art. Prior to buying my first piece of artwork, I actually got a free sketch, and this is the free sketch that I got from Larry Hama. This, I think, was done in January of 1985. I remember being kind of upset at the time because I was like, "Oh, if it had only been like a week earlier, he would have signed it 1984 as opposed to 1985 on this." And I think that was around the time G.I. Joe 33 had come out, if I'm not mistaken. But again, one of those Washington D.C. shows. I believe it was in Arlington or in Crystal City, Virginia. It was a show over there, and Larry Hama was the guest. And a friend of mine and I think I had a table, and I was maybe set up next to Larry because I was back in the day. I used to just buy comic collections and sell them. That was sort of my part-time job. And we got stuck next to Larry for the entire show. And my friend, frankly, was a huge G.I. Joe collector. He loved the toys. He loved everything about G.I. Joe. And I, at the time, frankly, didn't know a lot about G.I. Joe. This was sort of my first exposure. So I was kind of the novice. He was the Joe diehard. And, I was like, well, should we, just talk to Larry throughout the show? And so I really that was my appreciation was through just meeting Larry Hama. And at the time, I didn't quite understand the difference between writer and artist and all that. And although Larry was well known for, I guess, writing and creating the characters, I didn't quite understand it. I just assumed he just drew G.I. Joe. And so he's like, hey, if you guys, what sketches do you want? I'm happy to draw you a sketch. And so I chose Scarlet. My friend chose Stalker. And so each of them was drawn on this little notepad, as you can see the little little divots from coming out of his notepad there. But he drew me this fantastic sketch of Scarlet, and I was just amazed that somebody could just sort of whip this up so quickly. And Larry was the nicest guy to talk to that day. He really became a hero, taking the time. I think I was maybe 14 at the time, so he taking the time to talk to some teenage kids, for the entire day, and then doing free sketches for us was, going over and above in my book. And, for me, it was like, wow, I guess I should start reading these G.I. Joe comics. And that was that. Now, did I know he had done G.I. Joe 21 and 26? No, not really. I mean, I knew G.I. Joe comics were becoming popular, but I hadn't really read them at the time. So this sketch got me not only into appreciating original comic book art, but also the Joes themselves.
What an introduction.
Yeah,
indeed. Chuck, do you have a recollection of there being a line for people to get signatures, autographs from Hama?
No, it was literally, I don't think any, as popular as G.I. Joe it was becoming at the time, and that was when the book was really sort of taking off from a sales and publication. I think occasional people would come over, but it wasn't that there was, there weren't people with stacks of G.I. Joe books to get signed. And the idea of doing free sketches, or I think the idea of paying for sketches at the time was kind of crazy. No, there really wasn't a line, so that really allowed us to spend almost the entire day talking to Larry. So, and that was the greatest thing.
I note here that this doesn't look much different from Hama's sketches that we see from conventions of the last 3, 5, 10 years. Right. He has this looseness when he's sketching a drawing like this or laying out a page, either for himself or for the penciler or inker. And, usually when you look at an artist 40 years later, the stuff looks really different. And this looks just a tiny bit different.
Yeah, I think the way he draws Scarlet's eyes, usually he's got more of an eyelash to it nowadays. And there might be some, but I think that the basic sort of, I'll call this breakdown style. And, I think what you see from this is his style. And you have to remember, Larry started, although he was a writer, he was working on Iron Fist for Marvel Premiere. I believe it was his first book back in the 70s. So right as soon as the second issue of Iron Fist that had come out, Marvel Premiere 16 was an issue that Larry worked on. And he was also a protege, or worked with Neil Adams. And so I think he was working alongside that. But when you see this style and you realize, he drew G.I. Joe 21 and 26 completely, it was in this style. And I think you can also appreciate how much Steve Leialoha had really contributed to finalizing that. And I think if you look at those books, it actually gives him credit for either breakdowns or layouts or something like that, because his style is a lot looser. And Marvel did differentiate, sort of the credits they would give based on the sort of the tightness of the pencil style.
And the pay rate.
Yeah, and the pay rate, I guess, along with that, on how much you had to tighten it up. But, for me, it also showed, like I said, there was this great synergy, and I don't think people give enough credit to Steve Leialoha for really finishing G.I. Joe 21 and 26 and bringing it about to what we remember, and making those two issues really a classic thing. I think they really worked very well together and complemented each other based on Larry's drawing style.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we?
So that was the beginning of the Joes. Yes, or my
Okay. Do you want to segue into the next one?
Yeah. I mean, I think with that, I've as part of my collection, I have put a stronger focus on Scarlet. Having that initial tie to getting that sketch with Larry. So years ago, Larry brought out, and this may have been, and Tim, you may remember, it may have been 15 years ago that Larry started going into his personal collection and selling some things. And some of the things that he brought out were these Fury Force drawings. And a lot of discussion around what Fury Force was, how did it contribute to the future of the Joes. And I'd always heard that, I think Layla Galil, I believe is the pronunciation of this, or Lila Galil, that she was the sort of prototype for Scarlet. And when you see this sketch, there's a team sketch out there that shows all the Joes together, but this was the detailed shot of just Lila that was part of the set that he had done. And, it does look a little bit like Scarlet. So when you look at it, and, there's definitely some similarities between what you do. I guess it's partly that it's female, but also because it's also Larry's rougher style, at least with the face there, hard to get a real sense of, is this Scarlet? Is this not Scarlet? And there are some things that, Larry has gone out there and said that, he did use aspects of Lila when he was coming up with Scarlet. But, we'll come up on some other pieces in just a second here that makes me think. So this is dated 1981. And, the idea, for those that don't know, around Fury Force, and correct me if I'm wrong, since you guys also probably know more about it than I do, is Fury Force was something that they were working on, which was supposed to be the son of Nick Fury, and creating a team over at Marvel that was going to sort of carry on the tradition of what Nick Fury had done. And they had created these sets of characters. And there was a character that looked very much like Snake Eyes. There was a character that very much looked like that. So there's some concepts that definitely went across to G.I. Joe. But the question is, from a visual perspective, how much of this? It's always been a question in my mind: is were these sketches the sort of impetus of what we saw for G.I. Joe? And I guess we'll come across some other ones in just a second that sort of help fill out the story, at least in my mind, as to tell me that although he did create Lila, probably not necessarily the visual for this visual was the inspiration for what ultimately became Scarlet.
The term that you used, right? They were working on Fury Force. To my thinking, it's more, it was a pitch.
Yes.
And
yeah,
Larry may have been working on that pitch for weeks or months, but in total, it's like 6 drawings of characters, 2 drawings of vehicles, and a base, and then there's a 2-page typed document. And he pitched it, and editorial said no, or editorial said, maybe. And then G.I. Joe came along. So once or twice, someone has like a blog post, or just sort of out there on the internet, someone uses this sort of timing or this phrase. It's like, oh, like G.I. Joe was almost Fury Force, or like Snake Eyes maybe was going to have a hood. It's like, it's much more sort of divergent than that.
I would agree, and I think I guess when we get to the next one, I did talk to Larry about this and get his perspective at one point when we sat down at another convention. But yeah, I mean, it's still interesting to see what was going on, because again, given the time, remember there were Stories and Bizarre Adventures where Herb Trimpe had done sort of a prototype story for the characters that ultimately became the October Guard. And that's a slightly different story. We won't get into that one today. But there was a lot of just pitches and short stories that were going on in various black and white Marvel magazines and other places, and it was about to be the birth of the limited series that was going on in 1982 over at Marvel as well, with Contest of Champions and Wolverine and Hercules and all those other things that were going on. So the idea that creators were pitching these ideas and concepts that could become comics, wasn't far-fetched, and it was probably happening all the time. But just an interesting thing, because interesting to see what sort of happened with Nick Fury as a character, and it would have been interesting to see if Nick Fury did have a son, and maybe it still will become something one day. I do think that Fury Force is stuck in people's minds for one reason or another, and there's always a chance that the Fury Force may come back.
Yeah, it's things as well, like the specificity of the weaponry and things like that. So like
I used to own all the
weaponry.
I used to have all the sketches of that. There's another local collector here that was interested in those, so I let him add those to his collection. But yeah, the Lila one, I think for me in the history of Scarlet was something that was important to get and keep, and I think it's interesting to showcase as part of the origin of the character, because I do think, regardless of everything else, there were some concepts that Larry was developing in his mind around the character that did translate to ultimately, how he had thought about Scarlet.
Okay, and then this next image we'd included for you, to talk to the point about actually where the look of Scarlet came from and when. Yes.
So when I talked to Larry and said, "Hey, was this the first thing of first drawing of Scarlet?" He basically said no. He said the look and feel was all Ron Rudat, and so Ron Rudat's designs for the characters were really what everything was based off of. I created the dossiers and sort of the story behind the characters, but he gave credit to Ron for designing all this. And again, looking at the dates, and it's interesting that Larry did date the other drawing, 1981. This Ron Rudat's drawings, and this is something I took from. I don't own this piece for anybody that's interested. This was off of the Toys That Made Us, but Ron Rudat signed this in 1980, and you see all the different characters there for the toy designs, and there's Scarlet at the end. So she definitely had the look and feel of the toy itself, and that's what not only Larry was looking at, but Herb and other folks as they were looking at the characters. These were the original designs for the characters, and this is the original Scarlet. At least there may have been other Scarlets that Ron drew as well, but his were the designs that really defined the Scarlet character.
It's worth remembering with the creation of Scarlet that if you have a team of men with one woman in 1982, and this is going to be a toy, this is going to be a comic, and there's an eye that this might be television, out of all the different types and colors and costume combinations you could come up with for this woman, it's pretty narrow what several comics and toy and marketing and later animation people would pick. And so part of what I find so fun about sort of Rudat creates the visual and is that it is coincidental that Larry has this female character on this team that he had pitched to Marvel, and they don't look alike because Hama had seen these early Scarlet drawings from Rudat. Right. They look alike because it's like, well, she's not going to have some crazy helmet where you can't see her face. She's probably not going to have a buzz cut. And like, what are the things in culture that are influencing design in 1980, 81, 82? It's like Star Wars and Vietnam and
Farrah Fawcett, there was the flowing hair.
Yeah. So, if you had, I don't say this in any way to diminish what Rudat or Hama did, but if you were to take like a room full of artists and writers and designers, and in 1980, and you're like, come up with a woman to join this action team, it's like, there's only so many permutations that are likely.
Yeah, that reminds me of an interesting story that Mike Zeck told me about the origins of the black costume Spider-Man, which is, there's a rumor out there that somebody wrote in a letter and they were the person that sort of came up with the idea of the black Spider-Man costume. Totally false. What Mike said is that Shooter came to him one day and said, "Hey, you need to design a new Spider-Man costume." And Mike was like, "Well, spiders are black. If you have to design a costume, it's pretty obvious that and you're starting from scratch. If you were to design a spider costume, it probably should be black. And he really designed it from there. So there really was no, as much as other people want to take credit for it, there really wasn't that conversation of like the direction of like, hey, we got this great idea from a reader on doing that.
But coincidentally, there was a letter, right? And then last year, Marvel commissioned a story where they had, was it like Roger Stern and Rick Leonardi do a story as if that version. Sorry, this is a tangent.
Yeah, I don't know if they did do that, but again, I've talked to Mike and Jim, and again, it was, I'm sure at the time people were sending in story ideas all the time, and they like to think that they did that. But for Mike, who was the person commissioned to design the black costume, and Mike's memory on that was pretty good. There was never any discussion that there was something coming from a reader that, and they didn't, purchase it or not. So I think it's, over time, everything's evolved, and the fact that the black costume has become so important. And it, as you were saying, I think that was my point, which is coincidentally at the time, it's like if you were to create a story, it can all happen, and other people can have that same idea. It was not brain science to figure out that a black costume Spider-Man could exist, or that was a cool design for the costume, because that's what everybody would have designed at that point in time if you gave them a blank slate and said, go design a spider costume. So, But anyway, that's a tangent. So.
Scarlet, G.I. Joe.
What's the next slide, Mark?
Yeah, we're on the Scarlet thread. So
yeah,
let's hear about this.
Yeah. So again, when Larry had decided to part with things, some of the very cool things he parted with were his original hand typed dossiers for each of the characters. So this is really Larry putting the first thoughts together as to who these characters were. And what's really cool is to see early 1980s corrections, because he was using a typewriter that didn't even have the correction function.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it on a computer, and so you see these handwritten corrections on with typos that were in there of that. But I think that this really, as far as Larry's contribution to the characters, this is where it started, which is he would put down on paper based on his own experience, having been in the military, what their background should be, and really giving insights into those characters and bringing them to life. And this is, as we'll show here, this is what's translated into the backs of each of the cards that were on the toys itself. But I think if you scroll down too, it's interesting. I don't know, I didn't look at this one, like, did they this one doesn't have it, but some of them actually quote, like they have like other, excerpt from, R. Carosella. I don't know who that is, but that was probably somebody that Larry knew. Like he was using like Marvel editors and other people as the people that, these excerpts and quotes were coming from. So it is interesting when you see some of those other dossiers that's there. But again, just this is it. This is Larry's creation of Scarlet. And it's also interesting too is that if you see at the top, the number on it is number 13. So Scarlet really was sort of the last Joe that he went to go create, or at least sort of come up with as far as the creation of that. So I think he did them in order, and I assume it was probably based off of Rudat's designs. He probably went character by character. I haven't actually done the analysis to figure that out and sort of cross
right in that maybe that same
yeah, it could be. I have some of the other ones, so I guess I should go back and check that now that I've even sort of thought about that.
That previous slide where we see all 13, that is a photocopy of 13 separate drawings.
Is that okay?
Yeah, comped onto, because I have photocopies of each of those individual drawings. Gotcha. Our viewers probably know this, but Hama wrote these to keep the characters separate for himself in his own mind. And when Hasbro marketing saw these, they said, "Oh, those are great." And Hasbro and there had been this idea sort of percolating at Hasbro to add some kind of value to the toy or packaging. And what came about was these dossiers. And so the ones that are printed on the backs are edited versions of these because they're a little too long. And then it became the annual part of the toy line.
Yeah, I mean, and for people that bought those early toys, I mean, cutting these out and collecting these was a brilliant idea from a marketing standpoint as well, but also just added so much interest and a personality to a plastic toy that had just come out. You suddenly get to know the character so well, and it feels very thought out and detailed. And I think it started with Hama's original, as you say, they condensed it down from an even more detailed version of that. But that brilliant things that just were not done prior to that in toys.
Chuck, it sounds like you don't have a strong relationship with the G.I. Joe toy line of that time.
I do not. I, again, never have bought a G.I. Joe toy, strangely enough. I have giant ones behind me. But
how many of the how many toys have been given to you by someone who just wanted to find the link, just the right figure, just the right vehicle?
The only toy that has been given to me was I got one of the mail-in Cobra Commanders that a friend of my friend that went with me to the convention, I think I got it from his collection. Of course, it's now like the rubber bands have exploded on it, so it's in pieces. But that's the only G.I. Joe toy I have ever owned, strangely enough. As big of a G.I. Joe fan, I've had in my mind that I would like to go back and buy like mint condition or really nice condition toys of the original lineup, but I have never gone back and done it, partly because I'm a little scared that they're going to blow up, that the rubber bands are going to break at some point. So I don't want to end up with toys that are going to explode in the packaging. But yeah, strangely enough, I was more tied to the comics and the artwork than I was the actual toys themselves. So.
And on the comments, Diana chips in and reminds us of the fact that at one point they didn't want to pay Larry to do these file cards anymore and decided to do them in-house. I think his description was, to some young intern, and where they were always the best of the best at everything. And they quickly learned the difference between a marketer and an artist and decided to pay him again.
Yeah, there's some middle years, and then certainly at the end of Real American Hero, you can tell which ones are. There's some that might be Larry Hama. There's some that are a Hasbro person rewriting an earlier Larry Hama one, and there's some that are they're fun. They're just definitely not Larry Hama.
Yeah. I do have other dossiers. I think the latest one I have is for the fridge because I just thought that one was funny, and that one is actually. That is actually not typed. That one's actually on a sort of a computer that he printed out. It was the only one that he only printout he kept. But it's interesting to even see the progression that he moved from like an old style typewriter to a dot matrix printer.
I was looking at this one because the bulk of that original typed file card is actually what made it onto the published version on the back of the card, apart from this extra peer personality assessment at the bottom. And it's it's great and of its time. I've got to admit, I was as leery.
Was Robert Graves mentioned in G.I. Joe 1 for some reason, or was there a file of Robert Graves somewhere? I feel like I've seen that name somewhere. Grunt, okay. That's
Grunt's file's name, yeah. So this is Grunt describing her. Yeah, I was leery as the other guys about having a woman on the team, especially one as foxy as her. But after the first mission, with us, everything was copacetic. Yeah, excellent stuff.
Well, of the time period. So,
okay, should we move on to the next one? Wow.
Yeah. So this, again, I got to know Herb Trimpe very well in his later years and helped him with some of his sketchbooks that he would take to conventions. And obviously G.I. Joe was something I loved to talk to him about. And, while he was still alive, he had mentioned to me that he had done a number of designs before he got to G.I. Joe 1. So when he took on the G.I. Joe project, obviously the G.I. Joe 1 cover was used as part of the pitch process. But when he went to go sort of translate the toys, the Ron Rudat designs, he had to create the faces and other things for the characters that may not have been as distinct in the toys themselves. So he went through an exercise of drawing each of the characters in this sort of format. But in this set of drawings, he told me he wanted to do a version of it that was more military-like. He didn't, frankly, like the idea that the original costumes were, not standard military, and you wouldn't really ever see that, having come from a military background. And so the set of the original Joes that he had done, he had sort of taken a different spin on them, or a slightly different spin. And you'll notice Scarlett's costume here is very different than the toy itself, and ultimately the one that was drawn. So, I think he showed these to Marvel as part of sort of the creative process, and he always expressed disappointment to me. He was like, "Yeah, they kind of shot it down." And they basically said, nope, stick with the toy designs. And so he had to go back to drawing the toy designs later on. But I think what did stick relative to these designs is sort of the faces that you see on these. So this is obviously the way that he was drawing Scarlett in G.I. Joe #1 from that perspective. So there was some aspect of that. But
also,
great to see this. Yeah. This early.
And also, at some point, they decided to give her the ponytail as well, which wasn't on the figure.
That was Herb's, I guess. Because if you're going to put it in a helmet, you can't just have it free flowing. And I think the ponytail, and again, this is probably his own experience having been in the military, and maybe for the folks that were in the military that were female that he knew, putting it in a ponytail made more sense to him. So that's maybe why he gave it that look.
And as we record this in early July 2021, the rules for how women can keep their hair in the military just changed last month. There's more flexibility, because if you have a bun and you have a helmet, your hair gets pulled back and you can have a lot of headaches. Yeah. I'm really struck in this drawing by how pretty the pencils are.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Trimpe's work, we so rarely see the pencils because, he created such a volume of comics over 30 some years that we're used to the inks and then, how it's published in color. And there are other artists from whom seemingly a lot of photocopies of pencils, like Mike Zeck and Jack Kirby, they're in the fan publications. A lot of these photocopies of pencils are out there, and not so much with Trimpe. And so it's a real delight to see all the work he's doing here in the textures, in hair, in clothing folds, like leather for pouches, and a little bit of metallic, mechanical for her weapons.
Yeah, I think, it's a good thing is that you can see a contrast between Hama's style and Trimpe's style in drawing. Very, I think Herb focused on the black and whites and really having those shadows, and I think you saw a lot of that with Kirby as well. And there's obviously a Kirby influence when Trimpe joined Marvel in the '60s. I think he was trying to emulate a little bit of what Kirby was doing since he was the dominant style. But in 1982. Which is a little later in his career, to have these such tight pencils, it shows that he was taking a real big interest in this project. And I think he was, genuinely excited to sort of translate and actually have a military team that he was about to draw. And so I think he took his time with each of these drawings that he had done of each of the different characters and try to figure out, how do I make these distinct and how do I make them stand out as characters, given that it was an ensemble cast that they needed to bring together here. So really impressive behind the scenes things, and a little bit of history on these is that, I hadn't actually seen any of these until unfortunately after he had died. And then, I got to know the family a little bit better, and I had found out that I guess earlier he had given different drawings to different folks in the family, and they were all kind enough to sort of allow me to purchase a lot of these, knowing how big of a G.I. Joe art fan I was. And try to sort of reassemble the cast, so to speak, of the different characters. But he even felt they were so special that, frankly, of the artwork that he kept, these original Joe sketches were something that he thought was important to maintain. So I'm glad I could be the keeper of them now, and obviously, hopefully for future generations to sort of study these and really see these early versions of the Joe characters and how they evolved from here.
Mm-hmm. And there's a delicateness and detail to these illustrations that you don't always necessarily see in the printed work. And I guess part of that is the production process, that the paper that's being used and the printing methods that were being used at the time. And I wonder, would we have seen a very different kind of Trimpe to if they had some of the technologies of today, where he could have included a lot more of these sort of fine details on the paper and seen that.
Well, and I think when we get to looking at his artwork, I think here's an early example. We'll talk more about his special missions artwork. I think when you see that special missions art, it is really detailed. I mean, it's really a different. It's a finer line. The line work on it is super detailed. And if you go back and look at that, I really think that was Herb's chance to break out and do more of a fine art book. I think in the early Joe books, it was, we've got to do something that's a little bit more commercial. It's a little bit more model. And so it was a little bit more blocky. But by the time they got to special missions, it was, let's tell stories in the real world. And at the time, he was working on another book, Savage Tales, where if you look at the work that he did in that Savage Tales magazine, it's probably some of his finest work. Herb goes all out. Now, not characters that people know or care about, frankly, but the artwork in it is just fantastic. And I think that's part of it, is a lot of people, may not be true, fans of looking for all of Herb's work. But if you can find those early Savage Tales magazines, you'll see really Herb at his finest. But I think a lot of that got translated to those early special missions issues that he was working on. When you look back on issues 1 and 2, and, he's doing the pencils and the inks himself, versus having in issue 1 of G.I. Joe, Bob McLeod was actually the inker. And when you see the original pencils for G.I. Joe 1, it's very much like this, but Bob actually softened it, and I'm sure he got some direction from folks at Marvel to sort of, not make it look as, sort of trimpy as it is, and not as blocky, but sort of smooth out some of that and add that. But Bob has a very dominant inking style where the Bob McLeod shows, and I think you see that in G.I. Joe 1, which set a little bit of a different pace. But when you look at, say, G.I. Joe's, I think 7, I believe it was, where Chick Stone is inking him. Chick is, he was one of the Kirby inkers. And so I think when you see issue 7 of G.I. Joe, you'll see a more true version of sort of Trimpe's pencils reflected in G.I. Joe 7 versus, say, G.I. Joe number 1.
Okay, very good. Sorry, Tim, was there something else that you wanted to say before I flick on to the next one?
No, let's keep going.
Okay, all right. So, okay, the next one, I think it's kind of needs a drum roll, and I don't know where we'll go from here because it's such a pinnacle. But I'll just click onto it and be, set ready to set your faces to stun.
So speaking of Bob McLeod and G.I. Joe 1, this is the, I guess, the money shot, so to speak, of all the original Joes being introduced for the first time, at least by name, in the pages of G.I. Joe number 1. So yeah, I don't know exactly what to say. No, I think what I would say about this one is, I mean, starting with, again, you can see where we looked at Herb's original pencils, and I think is at panel 4 there, you can see sort of a feel of it, but panel 3 really just does not feel very trimpy, frankly. You can see a lot more Bob McLeod in the inking. I think you see the Zipatone that was used in the 1980s being used on this page, again, to sort of give it a more modern look and feel versus a 1960s feel that had that. And even the way you can sort of see his cheeks being inked there, this is very much Bob. And so I see more of Bob there than I do of Herb's original pencils. And I think I don't have copies of the original pencils. I do believe actually Bob did keep those original pencils, so they are out there, but or copies of the pencils, let me say. But yeah, I think it's interesting to sort of see the style change between Herb's original style and what ended up in the pages of G.I. Joe number 1. But great introduction. You got a nice Cobra banner in the background in the first panel there, leading up to sort of the money shot at the bottom, which is, okay, let's get to know each of these Joes and look at each of these Joes. And a few things I'll point out on this one, which is, I think it's the unknown Joe that was never released in the bottom right corner. This always gets me attention and sort of a laugh, which is Shooter. And you guys would know, have they ever come out with a Shooter figure?
Yes.
Yep.
They did. Okay.
They had a big backstory for Shooter and the reveal of the character in G.I. Joe Declassified. So they sort of, Larry did come up with a Shooter to kind of explain who this mystery Joe actually was.
And again, I think it's worth pointing out. I don't have proof. This is a guess on my part. This is a joke because Jim Shooter is the editor in chief, and it's not. This isn't like Hama or the letterer, and the letterer would not have taken matters into their own hands. But this is not someone. I don't think this is someone trying to create potential for a 14th member. This is a joke. Because on the top right of the panel, you can see the first letter of the 15th Joe, who seems to be bald. I think it's Baldy.
Yeah, B for Baldy, maybe. Yeah.
So this is, and you read comics, you read Marvel comics from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and people get nicknames in the credits, Smilin' Stan and Jolly Jack. Sometimes there'd be a fill-in artist, and the credits would say, it's like Jack Kirby will be back next month, but we welcome John Buscema for a fill-in this month, and we welcome so-and-so as the new regular artist, here's a talent, and then wrapping it all together in a bow is our editor so-and-so, and here and there that kind of jokey celebration could sort of leak up onto the first page or into the story. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby show up in an issue of Fantastic Four. So this is a throwaway gag, which in a 3-issue miniseries 25 years later, Larry Hama went back to.
Yeah. No, I do agree that would be my guess as well, is that they were always trying to make fun of Jim Shooter for different things, and he might get a kick out of it as well. But yeah, I think what's interesting about this though is looking at the corrections, and I think this is where the corrections start. If you see other pages from G.I. Joe 1, you'll see a lot of these same corrections all the way through, because when Trimpe had designed some of these characters or done those original designs, I guess they changed. They decided to change sort of on the fly at the very last minute and add some details to each of the different characters that made them a little bit more distinct. And Tim, you may have more insight as to whether or not it was due to toy changes and things that they were doing in the production of it, or if it had more to do with just sort of aligning around what the comic book characters would look like. But as you'll see, there's notes at the bottom, which is Clutch beard. So Clutch originally did not, they had to add the beard to that. So originally he did not have a beard. Rock and Roll, full beard, so they added a full beard to Rock and Roll. And then they had changed, it looks like, the name of Stalker from, they originally probably had lettered in Ranger and decided to go Stalker. And so, just on this page, you can, and then the big change is Snake Eyes, which is, they hadn't aligned around what Snake Eyes had fully looked like when Trimpe had penciled this issue. And so they ultimately had to sort of go back and correct all the Snake Eyes figures in the issue.
Yeah, this is so subtle. I want to say it out loud. Everyone, the paper has yellowed just a tiny bit. But if you look at Snake Eyes, the white inside Snake Eyes is a cooler, brighter white, like whiteout, like correction fluid.
That is correct.
So that he has been redrawn.
So he has been completely redrawn from the original look and feel of Snake Eyes to this, which is, I guess, the aligned on for the very last thing. But and same thing for Stalker. You'll see that was whited out as well, and it's a very subtle difference in color versus the other ones there as well.
When you look at for our viewers, when you look at original art, half the time or 3/4 of the time, if you see it's something like Stalker's name and you see that it's sitting on top of whiteout, half the time it's not a change because the script changed or it's based on a toy and they're figuring it out. Half the time it's because the letterer made a small error and left a word out or misspelled something, and the editor or the spell checker just corrected it. And sometimes in non-photo blue pencil, also called copy not pencil, sometimes the correction, like an arrow, is just drawn right across the artwork and pointing to the offending error, and that blue does not get picked up when at Marvel they photograph the black and white artwork onto film. So when you see corrections like this, sometimes it is exciting, as what Chuck is talking about right now, and sometimes it's like, oh, that word was misspelled.
Yes, that is true, and I think these are interesting in that it shows that the corrections were made after, again, the process is Trimpe would have penciled it. He would have mailed them over to Bob McLeod. Bob McLeod would have inked them on the same page on the original art that had Trimpe's pencils. And then it would have been sent into Marvel sort of for final approval. Typically, the letterer, I'm not sure where the lettering was done on this, but I do think it was lettered either after Trimpe had penciled it as well. But that shows me that these corrections all came in after McLeod had finished his job inking it, and that somebody had gone back probably in the offices and made these corrections. So I'm not even 100% sure. I don't think I've ever asked Bob this, if he made the corrections or if one of the editorial folks at Marvel had gone in and sort of changed all the Snake Eye images and added the beards and to the characters.
For viewers who know about the Marvel bullpen, the Marvel bullpen is where the editors have offices. The publisher and the president are upstairs making business decisions, and there are production people who are dealing with photographing the artwork, storing those films, right? In effect, the copies, wrangling like all the color information to send those off to the place that's going to do the color film. And some of these people in the bullpen are artists, and they're the ones that do the corrections. And every so often, if the inker is dropping off pages for some other comic or the next issue, the editor could say, can you do a fix on this page from your last issue? But often it was just, one of like 5 people in the office. It's like, we need you to redraw this head. We need you to black out this helicopter because the helicopter needs to show up in the next panel, that kind of thing.
That is correct.
Diana's put in a comment as well. Who's next to Hawk and Zap? So to the left of Hawk and Zap looks like there's more blurb coming along. So hinting at some other people on that screen.
You know what this means?
Well.
This means I want another Larry Hama miniseries.
Exactly, that's what it means.
The Baldy Initiative.
Maybe early origins of Duke and Roadblock or something like that. I don't know. Maybe they knew they were coming.
I was going to make a joke that doesn't work. What is our next? I love this. What is our next slide?
Okie dokie. Let's
shall we just get to it?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's moving on. We're going to go numerical in order from G.I. Joe 1 to...
Here we go.
G.I. Joe 2. So collecting the pages from the early books. So we moved from issue 1, which was drawn by Herb Trimpe, and I guess people sometimes forget. I'm sure the diehard Joe fans don't. Is that there was a backup story in G.I. Joe 1 as well? It doesn't always get reprinted when the story from G.I. Joe 1 gets reprinted, but it was a 10-page story called Hot Potato, and it's interesting in that there really were 2 artists that were the first to draw G.I. Joe. I think Trimpe, obviously you can see from the character designs, was the person that was designing sort of the look and feel of the characters for the comics. But Perlin was also the other artist that was drawing at the time. And so while Trimpe was drawing issue 1, Perlin got the assignment of drawing issue 2, which it's interesting I think sometimes people forget that they were sort of trading off between Trimpe and Perlin for a lot of those stories. So Perlin drew issues 2 and 5 completely and then had the backup story in 1. While Herb had drawn 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7. And you guys may have talked about it on others, but 6 and 7 were originally supposed to be 3 and 4. And then they ended up getting held up because of editorial changes. But issue 2, again, a personal favorite. I just thought the storytelling on this particular issue blew me away. Frankly, as a comic book collector, not being, sort of the person that read these I actually did buy issue 1 off the stands. It's sort of an interesting story. Is I was visiting my grandparents when issue 1 came out. So I went to the spinner rack and bought issue 1 along with maybe a Team America 2 or something that came out that month. And then as a kid, I left my comics at the airport when we were changing planes. And so I never got to read. That was like the big disappointment. So I never got to read G.I. Joe 1. I had bought it, and it was $1.50. It was not cheap as a kid. I had to save up for that issue. And I was so disappointed. I was like, I can't spend another $1.50 to buy that book. I guess I'll just have to read it later. So then I remember G.I. Joe 2, but I was so I guess so heartbroken after not being able to read G.I. Joe 1, I just sort of gave up on reading them when they were hitting the newsstand. So I didn't read G.I. Joe 2 until later, until it became a $40 comic book. I mean, those that were collectors back in the 80s, you knew that G.I. Joe 2 was the quote-unquote hard one to get. So I actually had to read it as a back issue when it was a quote-unquote expensive back issue. But the storytelling on this, I was blown away on just how great this particular issue was. And it really, for me, culminated with just the visuals in that last couple of panels. That it really just, talked about, this page really talks about sort of Quinn's sense of morality and really what that meant to him, and I would say the surprise twist ending. You sort of knew what was coming, and just to see those last couple of panels sort of come to fruition with Snake Eyes wearing Quinn's necklace was, I'd never seen storytelling quite like that. And so when I saw the original art, I always wondered, I was like, that last panel looks a lot like, they just redrew the panel to the left of it. Is it, a photostat or is it not? And a photostat is a reproduction on a special photographic paper that they would make back around that time frame. And when you actually blow it up there, Mark, if you want to blow that up, you can actually see it is in fact a photostat in that last panel that they just blew up. But even from a sense of storytelling, to say that we want to focus in and make sure the readers, the last thing that they're left with is the realization that, Quinn had left the necklace and Snake Eyes had found the necklace, and now it's over for these two. Just an amazing way to end a story, and for a quote unquote toy comic book, it was this to me proved it was one of the best written books, at the time.
So we are looking at a stat. That final panel is a reproduction of the second to last. Have you?
It is. You can sort of see the texture if you look at if you look at Snake Eyes' face. That's because of the stat. And I guess when you actually have the art in person, you can actually see it. I may actually have the art next to me. Let me see.
Chuck, have you pulled this panel off?
I have not. Let me. I actually have the page here, but let me pull it out to see if
are they both stats on the bottom? Because they're both pretty.
It's interesting. This looks like the whole last part. Like this is
the bottom.
You can see it. It's
the
sort
bottom
of
tier.
The bottom tier was replaced.
Okay.
And now that I look at it, it's interesting. Now that I look at it up front, this is actually a stat.
Yeah. Okay.
The top part is a stat. The bottom part was hand drawn, and then this is full stat. This part down here was hand drawn, but on the back of it, you can sort of see the note, which is 1 positive at 80%. So, I am using the light right now as I look at this to see if the original art was behind it or if it was drawn on maybe a separate page. Hard for me to see. I guess if I shine a light, it was. I can see it now. It's funny when you have the art, you can sort of see through it if there's a strong enough light. The panel was originally drawn larger. You can sort of see Scarlett's face was a lot larger, and they covered over that with the photostat. They actually shrunk it down. So so that they could fit all 4 of them in there.
Was the idea that what we're seeing as the second to last panel filled the space of the final 2 panels, and in shrinking it, they wanted to create?
I think that may be it, because Scarlett's head definitely looks a lot bigger, and so it looks like they rejiggered
so that you could have the final panel.
Yes. Well, I'd have to actually shine a really bright light to see if it's all under there, but I do believe I think I see over here. You guys can't see it. I believe I see, is that Stalker? Maybe? No, could be Stalker. But yeah, there's definitely there's definitely work underneath there that they covered up with the photostat. I guess they decided it was more dramatic to do the close up at the very end of it. So it's funny. I haven't pulled that page out in a number of years to look at it in detail. And even the picture of the, of all of them together in sort of the far away shot, that is also a stat. So I think they played around with visually how to end the story of, sort of going from a very far away shot to a pretty up close shot to a very up close shot at the end, and just figured that was the best way of doing it. Is here you're realizing, or here you're realizing, okay, the Joes have made it through. Oh, now you sort of see them all together, and now it's like focus in on the important part of that picture, which is the fact that Snake Eyes is wearing the necklace, and you know what's coming next. So, just again, blown away on just the storytelling, the way to do that. And the funny thing is too, no words. I mean, when you look at those last two panels, no words at all. You don't need the words to tell the story.
Yeah, this is
on
a
this
little
ultra close version. I think you can even see a thumbprint or fingerprint or something over on Snake Eyes' face here from the person.
And you can also see the
laying
line
down.
right below Snake Eyes' hands there of where the original art is drawn and where the photostat was. So they covered over that.
Yeah, so the original drawing, they're cropped at their waists, and all four heads and torsos are much bigger, which fills the two rectangles of these final panels. But in order to in shrinking that drawing to fit now as a second to last panel, and then diminish the headroom so there isn't space above their heads where you think there should be word balloons, you then have to draw in their pelvises and a bit of their legs. So these word balloons are yellow, so these must be cut out and rubber cemented.
Yeah, so that's typically done. That is correct. That's typically done when they're in a rush and they haven't, as I said previously, the typical process is pencil first, then send it over to the letterer. The letterer then will put in the words, and then the inker will finalize the drawings around it. In this case, that shows that they had to take the pencils, send them over to the inker, who was Jack Abel at the time. Jack would have inked everything, and then I guess they were still working on finalizing the story, and then so they just had somebody work on the word balloons on vellum. So they would have had overlays of the pencils, and then they were working in parallel on that, and then they would just cut it out and paste them over at the end. But yeah, from an original art perspective, it gets messy because those word balloons, they flake off and get lost all the time.
Yeah,
so it's a nightmare.
Rubber cement does not hold its adhesion for 40 years. I have a much later G.I. Joe page where a couple word balloons fell off, and so I used some archival double-sided acid-free tape to stick the word balloons back on, and I felt both excited to be saving and restoring the art, and also a little bit like I was violating it.
Yeah, I mean, for those types of projects, I have an art restorer here in California that I trust to do that. But you're right. And unfortunately, original art was not made. They were making it that month to get it out the door. It was not made to last as a fine piece of artwork. And so sometimes you have to do things to the artwork to help preserve it for a few more years. And frankly, in some cases, it might be smart for me to have all those removed and then deacidified and then put back on, but I don't necessarily have the heart to do it myself. But I think there does get to a point where you've also got to help protect the art and make sure that it can last for generations to come.
What's the can you zoom in 1, 2, 3, 4? Mark, can you zoom in next to panel 4? There's something written sideways on the right gutter.
It says "to your."
So that's an example, Tim, I think, of where they probably wrote YOU''RE and corrected it to say
yes,
YOUR.
That's right.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
You've got the Y "to your" is whited out there, and there's, I guess, the editorial requesting that change.
Yeah, spell check didn't exist as easily back in 1982.
I have seen a Larry Hama script or two where there is an apostrophe where there need not be one, or a missing one where there should be one. But that is the process, right? Like the editors fix the mistakes, and the letterers are checking the mistakes, and the proofreaders are checking the mistakes.
Yeah, and I think you have to remember when this is a monthly book, so everybody and sometimes a penciler might have 2 books to do a month. And same thing for a writer. So I'm not sure if Larry was writing anything else at the time, but you may have a week. Maybe it took a week to write the script, or maybe even just a few days. So focusing on spelling and all the rest of that stuff was probably not the biggest priority. It was getting the main product off to the next person so that they could work on their piece of this. So,
what is our next slide?
Next slide.
We do jump. We do that. We go to I guess issue 10, but what I wanted to illustrate here is and I'm not sure how many people, I'm sure the diehard Joes know that Larry, for many of the covers, actually created the layouts. And so he would hand an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to the artist who is actually scheduled to draw the cover. And this is one of the rare examples of Larry's hand-drawn cover layouts for issue 10. As far as I know, and Tim, you may know of others that exist, I've only heard of 3 of these that still exist. There was issue 9, issue 10, and issue 24, which was a Mike Zeck cover. So 2 of them are Vosberg's, and one is Zeck. And this actually came from Mike Vosberg. It was funny. I was over at his house, and he's like, "Hey, look what I just found." This was probably 3-4 years ago. He's like, "I found these sketches," and he's like, "I'm sending them." He's like, "These are Larry's original sketches that he had sent me to draw the cover to G.I. Joe's 9 and 10." And I was like, "Well, Mike, what are you going to do with them?" He's like, "Well, they're Larry's, so Larry can decide what he's going to do with them because I'm going to return them to Larry." And I was like, but wait, I've been looking for something like this all my life, Mike. So he got me in touch with Larry so that I could purchase them directly back from Larry. But it was great that Mike, felt because it wasn't his artwork that he, because he found out he was going to return them to Larry. And thank you to Larry for actually allowing me to purchase them from him. But I think it's just, you don't see these. Most of the, I talked to Mike Zeck and I was like, "Mike, what did you do with all your sketches?" He's like, "Honestly, I probably threw them away because, there was really no reason to keep them at the time." But the funny thing is, too, you can see a little bit of a crease. It was actually folded up and probably sent in like a regular envelope to before the days. You can sort of see 2 creases if you look at it, because it was probably just mailed in a regular envelope over to Vosberg so that he could draw the cover for this, because they obviously didn't have... It's right underneath the Real American Hero logo, I believe.
So to point out the obvious, since medium gray and dark gray can sort of feel the same, these are original pencils drawn onto an 8.5 by 11 photocopy of the empty rectangle with the logo.
That is correct.
And to answer your question, Chuck, I know of at least one more because I own Hama's cover sketch for issue 30.
Oh, great.
What?
Great. For breaking news, folks. Breaking news. Hopefully Tim will show it on a future episode. But
well, it is in my book, so someday everyone will see it.
Yeah, everybody will see it. That's great. I did not know another Zeck had made it out there.
There is one more in the wild that only was made public, I think, last week, very, very recently. Issue 37, which is the one
Zeck
of Flint jumping off the armadillo tank onto one of the Crimson Twins on the roller coaster, which is I posted that the other day on the Talking Joe Facebook page, so head over there if you want to see it. I can't off the top of my head remember the credit, but yeah, it's there on the Facebook page and also on Instagram if you do want to track it down.
So in looking at this blow up here, I think a lot of times fans of Larry Hama, we take for granted that his stories are entertaining and his characterization is compelling in a long-running series like G.I. Joe. And then sometimes we remember that, issues 21 and 26 are really well drawn and that the storytelling is really great. And what I think sometimes gets lost, and Chuck makes a great point earlier in this episode, that Larry started as an artist in comics, and even before the second appearance of Iron Fist in Marvel Premiere, he was drawing for other publications. Is that Hama's visual storytelling? I don't mean just like sequentially, like, oh, what's happening in issue 21 without the words. I mean his ability to compose an image and to populate it with characters that are in poses that tell the story. And again, I think people sometimes get sort of confused on sort of what story is because they're thinking of a script or a plot, like words in a row that says what happens. But for this cover, right, and there aren't a lot of comics that have covers like this, right? This cover, it tells a story in one image, right? So and yes, there's a little bit of a cheat because there's wording in that sign. And in this case, there's dialogue, which doesn't show up in the final. But everyone's pose is supporting this idea, right? That the two Joes are like, they're doing fine. Scarlet looks happy or excited. And even though Snake Eyes' pose looks a little bit like he's creeping along, there isn't tension. They're not like sliding up on the other side of that fake house the way that this full-bodied Cobra soldier is, right? And we see this happens in issue 21 a bunch. We see just enough of this second Cobra soldier on this cover to get the idea that there is a second Cobra soldier and maybe more, without Hama, A, having to draw the full body, and B, taking up valuable space, which is better spent on the texture of the wood, on the bush, the other bush, all the negative space around Scarlet, behind Snake Eyes, right? Like, we need to see that other house. We need to see an indication of another house behind it. So again, story isn't just words in a Word document or words on a typewritten page. And story isn't just descriptions of like sequential panels. Story is this much bigger, like uber thing that is both the ideas, the character, the change, the words, and the art all and the color all together. And Hama is, like we see that the Scarlet sketch that we started with, it's like, that's a good drawing. This guy can draw people, even if his style is sort of old school, it's loose, it's breakdowns, right? And you look at this, and if I was a cover artist and my editor said, oh, you're going to draw the cover to G.I. Joe 10. And I said, okay, what do I draw? And then they said, oh, well, we're going to mail you something. I would be so grateful that all of the problems have been solved. And now I can just worry about the time it's going to spend me to actually like do the pencil mileage to move my hand, right? Like, this composition is great because of the story, because of the spacing, the design, the poses.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and all
and-
of the.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say all of the examples that we've seen where Larry has done these very the classic era GI Joe covers, it's all there, just the composition and it's just then the honing it down and tightening it up. But actually, as you say, the sort of solving the puzzle of producing an incredible composition. What is where? It's all there on the page already. It's very evident from seeing this and the other examples of those prelims from Larry, what a great visual storyteller he is.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, to your point. People give credit to Mike Zeck and others, and not to say Mike's not a great artist, but it starts with Larry's layouts for these things, which is some of these designs is like coming up with the concept, and coming up with that is the other artist can really tighten it up and add something to it, and it makes it, as Tim was saying, it's like if you got like sort of the work done for you to solve the problem of sort of how to pull all this together, then you can focus your energy on making the cover just look fantastic. And I think that's what Zeck does in a lot of his pieces. And I think with Vosberg, this is not a typical Vosberg here, I guess, but in that but he can spend the time doing some of the details on there. And I always thought this was just one of the greatest, covers of like the fake house, and it's just like, how fake is this entire town? You just sort of see it from the wood grain and that just the way that right hand side of it is just like, wow, this is really a fake town. It reminds me of like going to Paramount's backlot or something. You also notice the things that change, right? There were words on this originally, which is interesting as well. And Scarlet's holding a gun and not necessarily her crossbow. So there, even there were some tweaks that I think either editorial made or Vosberg or other noticed when they were doing this. I'm sure taking the words out, but you get the feel of the fact that they feel safe when they're running there, but you don't need the words to say that anymore on the cover.
That crossbow, if I had to guess, it's Hasbro that said,
Yeah,
give her the weapon that the toy comes with. There's another artist who was working at Marvel at this time, Ed Hannigan, who is well known for doing a lot of great cover layouts at Marvel in the late 70s, early 80s. And Ed Hannigan, in fact, penciled the cover to G.I. Joe 21. And lots of people get this fact wrong because a couple prominent websites got it wrong, because the signature, if the signature even appears on your bottom left corner of your copy of G.I. Joe 21, if it's not sort of hiding around the back, it's really hard to read. But And there's an H, so people think it's Hama, right? But if that book was behind schedule, it wouldn't have made sense to have the guy rushing to draw the pages inside also draw the cover. But if you are, for our viewers, if you're interested in a little bit of this process of Marvel cover layouts, Gil Kane did a bunch in the 70s, right? Chuck, he was
primarily in the 70s. Yeah, I mean, I think he may have done some stuff. He was working more for DC in the 60s with Adam and other things. Yeah,
and then Ed Hannigan did a bunch of cover layouts for all different books at Marvel in the late 70s and early 80s. And Marvel and the Hero Initiative, which is that wonderful nonprofit, published a comic-sized benefit for Ed Hannigan back in 2009 called Ed Hannigan Uncovered, which talks a little bit about his process of doing these kinds of cover breakdowns, cover sketches, and reproduces some of them. And this is not a big expensive book. This is a comic book sized comic. So in addition to this being related, because it's the same kind of image we see here on the left, Hannigan does have a small and key connection to G.I. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting, and Tim, maybe you have it already as part of your book, which is understanding issue by issue who did actually the cover layouts, because there are, for many Marvel books, whether it's Dave Cockrum or other folks that were doing these cover layouts. Maurice Severin was also known for doing a bunch of them in not G.I. Joe, but I'd be interested to see, I was always told that Hama did, the majority of them, and I know the ones that Zeck had gotten, most of them were coming directly from Hama, but I'd be interested to understand which ones he didn't do. Just from a G.I. Joe historian perspective, maybe that's something that you can do some research and reveal one day. If you
I have not attempted that. I think some of those we may never know.
Yeah.
Because the artists have died, or some memories are a little fuzzy. I think the best we may do is that Hama did most of them for the first 100 issues and probably beyond.
Yeah.
But when I spoke to Mike Zeck when he appeared at a convention in London, I spoke to him briefly about this idea, and I think he said to me that not every single one of his G.I. Joe covers was based on a Hama layout. So some of them were, his pure originals without that underlying work from Larry. And you probably know better than.
Yeah, I don't know if I've talked to Mike about, and I guess I could ask him which ones he designed himself. Like I said, I talked to him, and it is funny to see, like, G.I. Joe 24 looks just like Zeck's final thing. It's just Zeck, finalized it and made it look really tight. But Hama's design is there.
Another factor in this formula or schedule is that 4 issues a year were advertised on television. And so those covers had to be completed earlier in the cycle.
Interesting. And you may know better again. I thought 10 was 11 was on. I remember 11 was a commercial, so I don't think 10 was on.
I mean, 24 was.
Yeah, 24 was.
And that's a Hama sketch, which becomes the Zeck cover.
Maybe 10 was. I'm vaguely remember. I know 11 was, because I remember that snow job,
if 11 was, 10 was. There is a list.
Yeah, it would have been.
But if 11 was, 10 certainly was not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was done by 11 was done by Bob Camp, which was an odd choice because he had no connection to the series whatsoever, except he was in animation, I guess. So
I think the connection might have been sort of Marvel in general or Larry Hama. So Larry in writing Larry Hama writing G.I. Joe was his second job. His day job was being an editor at Marvel, where he was picking artists to work on Crazy magazine, and a little bit later the Conan books. And so he was constantly, people were coming to his office and he's calling people, and his assistant is calling people. And you'd ask someone because you know that they can deliver, or because they walk in the door, or because you're friends with them and you want to like toss them something.
Well, anyway, good example of a Larry Hama cover layout here.
Yes. Next, what's our next slide?
What's next? Boom.
Ooh.
I wanted to make sure we got a Mike Vosberg in here. Although finding Mike Vosberg examples is a little tougher than, frankly, some. So I had explained this on the live stream that we had done with Mike. Mike was, G.I. Joe was probably, although we loved him working on that from his standpoint, he had worked a long time on She-Hulk, and then he gotten the assignment after Trimpe had left to work on G.I. Joe. But, frankly, didn't come from the same background as Trimpe, where Trimpe was in the war. Vosberg was not. He was. But for him, this was more of an assignment of drawing these characters, and also a little bit difficult because you had to stay on model. You had to draw a whole host of it. It was a lot different than drawing, say, She-Hulk, which was more of a singular character. But I think he rose to the challenge on doing it. But one of the challenges too is Mike always liked to also ink his own work if he had time to do that. His favorite work is inking himself, and so I think here he was working with D'Agostino, who came. I think D'Agostino was known a lot for, I don't know, later in his years for working at Archie and other places, but had a very sort of different style than Mike did. And similarly, I think it was like Bob McLeod and Herb Trimpe. They had sort of two different very styles. So I think ultimately Mike didn't see all his work always reflected in the G.I. Joe artwork he did. And so as from the perspective of saving his favorite artwork, G.I. Joe was not necessarily his favorite artwork to save over the years. And so Mike was known. He taught classes in his spare time. Some people have reached out to me that said, "Hey, Mike was my teacher for a semester of for my art class." And at the end of the art class, he would just pull out a stack of pages and say, "Take whatever." Everybody gets one in the class, and so people would walk away with an original art page from Mike's collection. And I have a feeling that a lot of the G.I. Joe pages ended up in those giveaways. Sometimes he said he would give them away to kids at shows. He frankly wasn't there to sort of make a lot of money off of it. Because of that, it's very hard to find Mike Vosberg G.I. Joe pages. I have never, and you guys again may have seen more, I've never actually seen one of his original covers out there. He didn't, work on a lot of them. But have you guys seen a cover, original cover out there?
I can't remember to my knowledge.
No, I don't think I have. I've been looking for him for years. No. And the covers he started, he did 8, he did number 9, he did number 10, he did number 12, 13. And then after that, the one that we're showing here, that's actually a Herb Trimpe cover. I think he did 15, which is the other Quinn one in the airplane. But none of those have surfaced, and who knows exactly what happened to him. But Mike did keep a handful of pieces, and when I got to know him about 20 years ago, obviously G.I. Joe was top of mind, and I said, "Mike, I'd like to buy some of your artwork or whatever you've got." Mm-hmm. And I bought a lot of his other work for American Flag, She-Hulk, some other things, but he only had, I think at the time, maybe 2 or 3 pages remaining from G.I. Joe. And this is one that he took extra pride in. This was always his favorite image that he had drawn for G.I. Joe, and is the one when he gets recreation requests. This is the one that people also request. And, I love it just because this was a great storyline. I think at the end of issue 12, you sort of see the reveal that Snake Eyes has a face that's, that's all burned up, and he's hiding it underneath the mask, and that's revealed. But the sort of the interplay between these 3 characters being stuck under the water here in a small enclosed space is just an amazing thing. And I think the light and the dark on this, I just love the art composition of this particular piece here as well. Now, nice, it's also that it's the issue that had the first appearance of Destro, although obviously Destro is not on it whatsoever. And frankly, for those, the bottom part, the indicia out, having that on the page as a splash page and the title, it next to a cover, this is really sort of as good as any sort of art collector would want. It's a nice big image, and it's sort of. So I always thought these indicias and just sort of aligning it to when it was published and all that, even though that's all photocopied on, or it's photostated on there, it's just neat to have, and just sort of places it in a time and place, and you've got all the characters at the bottom and all the copyrights and all that stuff, which is kind of interesting to read.
And some tape. Do I see clear adhesive tape on the left and right?
Oh yeah.
What are the words that have been scratched out in the left and right margins?
That's interesting. Let me see if I have that page handy here and I can look at it live. I don't know if I do.
On the right, it's fixing. Oh, I think it's correcting the letterer and colorist's names.
I think so, and that would,
Yeah.
it's probably one of these things where they may not have known who the colorist was going to be. I think my gut is Bob Sharon was doing. I know he did the coloring on issue 13, so they probably had written in Bob Sharon and then decided to switch it over to Christine Scheel. And then same with the letterer.
And on the left, it says move credits. And what I like about the credits down at the bottom is that, and I think a lot of fans kind of got wind to this, is that all of the kind of is it copywritten or trademarked characters that would eventually see release as toys would be named here. So you've got Hawk, Scarlet, etc. But if you've got a character introduced who maybe hasn't got a toy on the way, they're not going to be named down there. So we won't have Quinn, for example, because he doesn't have a toy to be trademarked.
At least at that point in time, he did not.
So
yes.
I think I'm seeing a cut just above that X on the left side next to the L of Larry, and then a cut just past Shooter's name. So I'm guessing what happened is they were accounting for a normal height for the indicia. They ended up getting this larger paragraph, and so they had to
with too many characters in it. Yeah.
So they had to redo the credits and move the credits up like a centimeter into the artwork.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing there's a little bit more inking underneath all these names. Can you scroll a little bit up, Mark?
Yep.
So we can focus on the. All right. So. So Diana Davis made a comment a minute ago that the lighting here is super dramatic, as if it is inked as if the flashlight is the only light source, and that would have to be a very powerful flashlight to cast such a glow. But that's the kind of drama that we expect from comics and TV and movies. Like I'm not so interested in sort of the realistic version where there's like 1/4 as much light and we can't see the characters. So you have these wonderful cast shadow, behind Snake Eyes. And then D'Agostino is choosing to, just in front of Dr. Venom's face, to kind of stop drawing the shadow of Snake Eyes' arm and just sort of cross hatch it out like it's a gradient, because he doesn't want that solid black to slam into Dr. Venom's face. Same thing happens with the cast shadow of Venom's head behind his head, where there's already a spotted black. Can you go up a little further, Mark? And then again, in terms of, I think Chuck is hinting at this with like this is a memorable drawing of Vosberg's. So in terms of the story of a G.I. Joe splash page, right? Like we know that things are wrong because there's a crack in the ceiling and there's water trickling in and also like dropping and like streaming in. And then the water's now up to their, calves. Dr. Venom is holding a prop, which it's like you only hold a chair like that when you're about to swing it into a person or a window or a door to escape. And there's immediate conflict because of Snake Eyes' pose, right? So we have these two guys on the right in opposition to this guy on the left. And then Vosberg makes this wonderful decision here to use a film term. This is at a Dutch angle. So if this was a camera on a tripod, the camera has been tilted to one side. And in film and television, a director does that to subtly or not subtly communicate to the audience that the character is off balance, often sort of mentally. And so we have this moment of worry and drama and conflict all in this one page. And one of the things that I love about comic art from the last century is that even though it's drawn for color, it's also drawn for black and white. And there are artists nowadays, and sort of the inking style of the last 20 years is you don't spot blacks this much because the colorist is going to create a gradient, right? Like, if we look at Quinn's arm just to the right of the flashlight, there are little cast shadows on those two muscles. And nowadays you wouldn't ink that. The color artist would do like skin tone and then darker skin tone and then darker skin tone. And that can be quite lovely. Vosburg is in his pencils, presumably like picking out places for D'Agostino to ink, and then D'Agostino's inking. And so there's all this communication from shape, from line, from design, and from poses.
Tim, great analysis. I mean, I think you also pick up on the fact that, Mike went on in his career to become a storyboard artist for the movies. And so I think the idea that comic book artists, very easy translatable skill if you're very good at it as far as blocking. And I think cinema has an influence on just the way that comic book artists lay things out. And the very good ones know how to block and tackle that as if it was laying out a movie. And I think that's what we see in some of these G.I. Joe stories that's just so fantastic, is this is laid out like a movie. Is like I'm joining it in the middle of a really tense scene, and I want to know what happens next. And I think this is where the combination of those two really work. But I do think Vosburg was very good at sort of creating storytelling through his panels, and despite the fact that there's so many characters in G.I. Joe that you have to deal with. And I think some of my most memorable stories of the G.I. Joe storyline are from those issues in the teens, where you had the Dr. Venom storyline, and and then you have Baroness getting quote unquote killed and coming back to life, so to speak. But those were, to me, I thought those were the real sort of highlight of both story wise and just storytelling through the artwork, were those issues that Vosburg was working on.
I have two other little comments on this. As a contrast, so I like Trimpe's cover, and I believe that's inked by Steve Mitchell. I do like that cover, but in terms of what we were talking about with the previous slide, that cover doesn't ask a question. Right. And my favorite covers ask questions or promise something, right? And I look at this splash page, and if it was actually the cover, I think you'd lower Quinn's arm with the flashlight so you could see more of Snake Eyes, and maybe it wouldn't be Dr. Venom, maybe it'd be like 3 Cobra soldiers. But the basics of it is there isn't really a story in the cover. It's a great shot, but there is a story here. And so in terms of like satisfaction, when I look at this page, I'm pulled in more quickly. And then Mark, can you zoom into the middle? Just to go back to sort of the difference between drawing then and drawing now. If you drew someone holding a flashlight now in comics, you would not ink that sort of inked halo around it, right? You might draw like an upper line and a lower line for a cone, but you probably let the colorist do a lot of the work, where the color would be a transparency, like a yellow transparency on top of Snake Eyes. Whereas here, there is no place for the colorist to color any of Snake Eyes within that halo. Like that's going to have to be white or light yellow or yellow. Right.
And Tim, I think the reason for the cover, again, you alluded to it, another commercial that was used. That I remember that one being used, and I think they were introducing Destro, and
yes,
that was why it was important.
Gotta sell the toy.
Gotta sell the toy. It was a commercial. It probably got made before the issue even got made, just so that they could have it out there. So
yes, the cover. So Hama has talked about how he would have to write a plot for an issue based on the cover that was going to be in the ad.
That's correct.
Speaking of issues that have an advert, our next page did indeed have its own advert and is somewhat of a classic. It ranks up there in the echelons of everyone's favorite issue. So here it is.
I'm even wondering. Oh, this one, yes. Man, I guess subliminally I was thinking of like which ones were on TV. I hadn't even thought about that when I selected the images that we were going to look at today. Yes, again, there's that great Mike Zeck cover. Didn't match to the artist inside. The artist inside was a guest artist, was Russ Heath. And folks may know Russ. He was really more known for his DC War artwork. He did a lot of stuff like All American Men of War, but Russ Heath known for, and also a lot of his say fantasy, but some of like underwater stuff, but a lot of his very detailed work. So a different style. Russ did go on to work in animation for G.I. Joe, which Tim, you may know if that was before or after this. I assume it was after, but
before.
it was before, and maybe that's how he got the job. But this was a fill-in. Russ was asked to do sort of a fill-in issue right after the sort of Vosberg's run was coming to an end, and I won't go into the detailed story on this one here, but focus in on just sort of the fact that Russ, I mean, when you look at this issue, I know we've talked about 21, we've talked about 26, which were both Hama drawn issues. For me, 24 is really the sort of the third sort of most classic issue, if you want to look at it that way, just because it's so well drawn and drawn from somebody that had really that experience of drawing in I'm going to say a more classical style. And I think here you see even Destro looks a little bit more realistic than we've seen him in the past, where Vosberg's rendition of Destro is I would say a little bit more cartoony. Here you see almost a very realistic face on Destro, and the detail and especially the Baroness. I mean, Russ Heath, I got the pleasure of having him over to my house sort of towards the end of his life. And he loved to draw women. He was very much a ladies' man. Really enjoyed sort of drawing the female figure and that. And I think he really enjoyed, as did frankly many artists. I think Ron Rudat, Mike Vosberg, all loved to draw the Baroness. And I think the ones that were very good at drawing female figures really took to the Baroness very well. And in 24, you just have some great images of the Baroness throughout, including on this page. But what's at the end is, obviously the big reveal of Zartan in the very last panel. And I think if you look at the artwork, and I don't know if you can see it, is that Wild Weasel that's next to him?
Yes.
I believe that the images of Wild Weasel, if you zoom in really, really close, were actually redrawn. So again, another thing where they may have either been working with the toy or they wanted to make sure that it was on model and change some things.
I'm seeing
a line around
him. Yeah,
exactly. I think he was cut out and pasted on to that particular drawing there. And I believe, do I have the page? Let me see if
Chuck, pull it off.
No, I can't do that.
I'll send you my I'll send you my. I have an early Transformers cover. And there was something comped onto it, and I pulled it off.
If you see this is the back of the art, so you can see that they actually taped something on. It looks like they also taped something in the top panels there too. Yeah, it's the Wild Weasel panel at the very top.
Can you hold it up to the light and tell us if you see something through it?
Can you see something? You can sort of see some of the images there, but I think it's just that they cut out. If you look really closely, and you can actually see that they cut out Wild Weasel and put a new Wild Weasel image in there. So they actually literally cut the paper, cut out the Wild Weasel, and then put a new version in there.
Okay, it looks like it's at the cutout at the top and also at the bottom of the page too.
Yes, I think it's in both. And on the bottom, it looks like it's a paste over as opposed to a complete cutout. It looks like they actually cut the paper right here.
Wow.
And they actually just put a new piece of paper in there, where on this one they pasted something new on top of it.
On the top, is it a cut under? Is that is the new art on the bottom of the page and taped into place? Is that what you're seeing?
On the bottom of the page, yeah. There's probably, again, if I shine a real light, there probably should be something underneath it. Although it looks like a stat.
Okay.
So it looks like they photostatted.
Yeah. So
it doesn't play well on TV when I look at it that way, but this part does look like it is a photo stat that they had done. So they may have enlarged it from another drawing and then just pasted that on. I'd have to do some more analysis to see if there's actual art underneath there and there's just a different look and feel to Wild Weasel.
Yeah.
But again, I think you see that with toy art, whether it's G.I. Joe or Transformers. I think as it's getting towards deadline and they're trying to finalize the characters, when the artists are probably drawing the initial story, they don't necessarily have the reference that they need to draw the characters. So they typically, if you look at the pencils, they just sort of block in the character and say, when it's finalized, I'll go ahead and draw this in. And I think that's what happened.
Yeah, it was on the top of the page when you turned it around. There was a bit of paper underneath, which is, I guess, is the other side of where that Wild Weasel had been cut out.
So I want to point out. Oh, Mark, go for it.
I was going to ask as well if there's a story behind how you came by this very sought after art.
Sure. There's stories behind all these pieces.
It may not have been sought after when you got it, but
it probably wasn't.
Certainly
I remember being, I had a friend of mine that was up at a show in San Francisco, and I think I was still living on the East Coast at the time. And he was at the show, and I don't know if it was Big Wow or whatever the precursor to Big Wow show was, but Russ Heath was in attendance, and I think he had walked by Russ Heath's booth, or Steve Wyatt, who was working with Russ, and said, "Hey, they've got the complete G.I. Joe 24 on Russ's table. Do you want to go ahead and buy it?" And I think it was, I hate to quote numbers, maybe it was $5,500 or something like that at the time for buying everything. And I was just like, hey, how often do I get a chance to buy, a complete G.I. Joe story? And then also I just respected the fact that it was coming directly from Russ and that the money was going directly to Russ. And I think at the time, although that seems like probably a paltry sum today, that was probably a lot of money for G.I. Joe art back then. This was probably close to almost 15 to 20 years ago. So, at that time, G.I. Joe pages might have been going for $100 to $150 a piece, and that would have been over $200 a page. So it was paying a bit of a premium. But at the time, I was also like, Russ did such a great job on this particular issue, and you can't really say no to it. So I did pick it up. I had it in my collection for years. They actually did a Russ Heath exhibit where I lent some pages in Europe, where some of the pages were on exhibit over in Europe from this issue. But then another fellow collector, I do get occasional requests from folks to say, Chuck, I know you've got a big G.I. Joe collection. Will you let me have a piece or sell me a piece? And he was interested in buying this, and I'd known him for a while. And I said, all right, I guess I can let the complete book go, but don't break up the book. I don't want to, I was like, I'd like to keep it together if you do keep it. And then I guess good or bad, as soon as I did that, frankly, I regretted it. But again, it went to a good home. But 2 years later, he gave me a call and said, look, I'm thinking about letting it go. Do you want me to just sell it back to you? And I was like, absolutely. So that was a good occasion where I did let something go, but it did come back to me. And I'm very happy that it came back to me and that I can keep this together. So, yeah.
Can you go back to okay, well, let's start with so one of the reasons why people love this issue, Diana Davis said so on a previous episode, is that it looks just like the show because Heath designed all the major characters for the show and a lot of the vehicles and props. At the same time, what this page doesn't have, and I know it's a quiet scene, it's just talking. What this page doesn't have is the same amount of like body twisting in space, physical energy and verve of, say, the previous slide with that Mike Vosberg splash page. And Heath's artwork has a lightness to it, right? His surface qualities, his accuracy, his textures are all extraordinary, but he's coming from a different place than the like Jack Kirby sort of like athletic action. I mean this in a nice way, like violence, like the violence of physicality, where someone isn't just like stepping, they're like lunging through space. And you can see it even to some extent if you compare this page to the cover and the sort of full slide. Something else that really, we have this Zeck drawing and the twisting of Storm Shadow's torso, the twisting forward of Roadblock, right, and this dynamic curl, the contrails from Cobra Commander's claw, right. This image is really sort of wound tightly, and there's a leisureliness to how people stand. Like look at Firefly's sort of surprise as he turns, right. There's a gentle quality to it. And so as much as I would have loved Heath to draw many, many more issues of G.I. Joe, his style is so different than a Zeck that I think there actually would have been a little bit of a disconnect with compared to the covers, even though Heath is like, one of the preeminent combat artists of comics. Something that I also love about this page is that on that top panel, Firefly and Wild Weasel are drawn in perspective, right? Like nowadays you would just draw that straight on, and then in Photoshop you would skew that image into perspective. And it's possible that Heath did that. He drew it flat and then he like turned it a little bit on that side and somehow traced that, or photographed that and traced that. But he probably just drew it freehand in perspective because he was that good.
Yeah, I mean, I think Heath was great. I do think this story, there is some action that happens, but I remember at the beginning of the story, it's very much like, Cobra Commander just standing there talking. It sort of lets it's a start and stop as far as the action on that. So there is a little bit more of standing around and letting the story be told by the words, rather than, making the action do all the work in this case. So I guess even as a storytelling for this particular issue was a little bit different, which is maybe why they wanted to get Heath to do it. It's interesting. I don't think I've ever really gotten the full story as to why, Vosberg left after 23, and then ultimately they did the transition in 24, and then had Springer take over in 25 as the regular artist. But Springer,
sorry, I can speak to that very briefly. Vosberg was ready to move on.
Yeah. No, I know mentally he was, but obviously, for the book, he was a great artist for the book, frankly. So, but Springer, I know, had worked on, with him, he was one of the regular anchors on She-Hulk and other things like that. So from a succession perspective, Springer made a lot of sense to bring on as the follow-on.
That's a good point.
Worth pointing out as well that this, I think, is Zartan's first on-screen appearance, so on panel appearance. So may as well just state that for the record. Wow, first Zartan.
That is, yes, before 25.
Okay, we have got a sort of an incredible wealth of material here. So I'll push on to the next one, which is not to diminish how amazing that this page and issue is. So we were just talking about him. Here's the man, Frank Springer, on again a classic issue 27.
Yeah, so as we on the eve of the release of the new Snake Eyes movie that will be coming out in the next few weeks, I thought I had to have an example from the Origin of Snake Eyes issues, which was 27, and a little bit of more of a backstory on this. So I'll talk about the art. So Frank Springer obviously took over. This was his first issue because 26 was done by Hama, 25 is his first issue, which was the first full Zartan. Then they took a break, went to Hama and Steve Lealoha inking that, and then came back, and then this was sort of the beginning of his more regular part run on this. But I guess 28 though or 29 was Marie Severin, so still some fill-ins now that I think about it. But this was just a great sequence of, obviously the origin story goes without saying. It's going to last. It's probably the most memorable storyline, 21, 26, 27 of Snake Eyes' origins, and it'll probably be told many different times, and look forward to the way that they're going to tell it in the new Snake Eyes movie. But just a great battle sequence between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow erupting here as part of this. And so I was lucky enough, I guess the story behind this is, there was a collector, and you may have talked about him many times, Howie Welsh. And this was a page that I actually was my first sort of trade with Howie. Howie was trying to assemble pages from each of the different G.I. Joe issues. And he also lived in Virginia, which wasn't too far away from us. So we actually got together for a day, looked through original art, showed him a lot of the pages that I had, and looked through his collection. And he was next to myself. I think he was one of the other people that was very adamant about finding the original G.I. Joe pages and trying to build a collection of that. And so, Howie, I really respected what he was trying to do as far as also sort of continuing on and telling the legacy of those G.I. Joe comics. But Frank Springer had sold a number of his pages. I was lucky enough to run into Frank at, frankly, the only convention I think I've ever seen him at. And I bought some G.I. Joe pages from him, but I believe these went to either Europe, or I had missed out on some of these pages from 27. And Howie had ended up with a number of pages from issue 27, including this whole fight sequence between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And so as part of the trade, I ended up getting, you know, the pages that all sort of went to this fight sequence. And I forget what I had traded Howie, maybe a page from issue 3 and some other early pages, so that he could sort of fill out his collection. But really appreciate, you know, Howie working with that. It was a great day. And, you know, and I just want to remember him as a great collector who unfortunately passed away a number of years ago. But this is a great page that he was, you know, helped me to add to my collection, and I really appreciate it.
It has taken me a long time to realize how much I like Frank Springer's art, compared to all of the other artists who contributed to the first 50, 100 issues of G.I. Joe. His was the stuff that, his issues were the ones that I connected to the least when I was initially like building my complete collection of issues before they were, you know, they were all available in paperback. And his cover with the dreadnoughts, when I first saw it and I got it, I just thought it was just really unappealing. But as I've gotten older, and one, I sort of understand just how hard it is to draw comics and how hard it is for editorial to put together a monthly book and not miss too many deadlines, right? Particularly when it's tied in with a toy line. I just sort of appreciate any of the work, even the issues that I don't like. But part of what made me, part of what turned for me with Springer's work is to not compare it to issue 26. You know, being chapter 2 of a 2-part story where everyone really likes chapter 1, you know, like you can't win. And this art on this page so much more agrees with Trimpe and Vosberg and even, you know, Marie Severin an issue or 2 later. And you know, like Hama is coming from a different place. And that connection with Leia Aloha is so particular, right? And like only those 2 issues look like those 2 issues. So there's also a looseness to Springer's work. And what also helped me sort of connect more with it was after he died, I was Googling him, and to see work that he had done for other publishers and for other publications separate from G.I. Joe, I could see his comics work in this continuum of his career. And it made me appreciate his skills much more, which I wasn't seeing when I was just comparing 27 to 26.
Tim, I feel the same way as you. I think I had that same reaction, which was 27 just didn't seem as good as 26. But in the scheme of things, it was also classic G.I. Joe artwork, and in the vein of what, say, Vosberg was doing, with a slightly different style to it as well. So agree with that. And I think, you know, Trimpe, Vosberg, others, they've done some great work outside of G.I. Joe, and you really, when you see that work, you do appreciate them as artists. I mean, I think Springer's work on Nick Fury after he took over for Steranko, I mean, how hard is that to follow Jim Steranko as an artist drawing, you know, a character that Jim Steranko made popular? Very tough. But he did a fine job doing that. And I think here he had to step into some shoes and follow some other great artists that had done stuff. And, you know, the action sequence is really, really great here. And, you know, the renditions of especially Storm Shadow there and Snake Eyes, just, you know, what we would think of as classic Joe of the time period.
And yeah, Snake Eyes being he's left really open in terms of the colors. He is in the black and white inks. He is white, apart from a few spotted blacks here and there. It's being left for the colorist to fill that in. I think, Tim, you were straining to look over here that there is some white out on the Softmaster's eyes, where they've obviously had to, you know, gone back and fine tune it to try and, I guess, try and make sure that the characteristic of the you know, the eyes is caught correctly.
I was also noticing the guide ovals for where to place the word balloons. There's a blue oval.
Yeah.
There's a blue oval on every panel where I don't know if it's the letterer on a first pass or Springer himself showing visually the letterer, like, this is where I want you to put the word balloon because I haven't put anything important here. And then I think they're numbered. And again, there's this non-photo blue. And if the non-photo blue seems crazy to you, like just look above the top panel, right? Book, issue number, page number. Those pre-printed lines on this Marvel Bristol board are in non-photo blue.
Excellent. Are we ready to move on to the next thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this section we can repurpose our gallery jingle. So I'll do just that.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
That came through. It said, "Let's take a look at the covers in the gallery." And here's definitely a cover.
That is a cover, and I think it's interesting to note. We didn't note that Michael Golden had done the cover to issue 27, which knowing how I've picked covers, most likely that was also a commercial that was going on at the time. And I think this was actually a commercial, if I remember correctly, as well. So I keep picking ones that turn into TV commercials. This is a Michael Golden cover as well. So where on 27, Golden was working out of black and white or in black and white artwork similar to the interior artist. Here he took a different approach. So Golden did the covers to similar to this for issues 23, 29, 36, and then yearbook 1. But he took more of an animation style, which was Golden did this for a little bit. He did it on other books like Crystar and Cull. But this is a very large, and I actually do have it next to me to show you just how large it is compared to. So this is how large the painting is. This is the page to 24, so you can see.
Wow.
Much bigger, very huge, the largest animation cell that you can imagine. So, but yeah, it goes all the way down there.
Chuck,
and so my understand. Sorry, go ahead.
How many layers is that?
I believe I have it in plastic right now. I believe it's 2 or 3 layers.
Okay.
I think it's 3 layers if I remember correctly, because I think the blacks are drawn on one layer. Then you got sort of that blue, like where the plane is, and then I think you've got a background layer on it. So I think it's a 3 layer if I remember correctly to this piece. And then they all line up. They've got little guides that will show you where they actually should be placed on top of it, because each of them is on acetate, similar to an animation cell. But what's interesting is where a lot of artists would do the black and white, and they would actually do it on a board and then photocopy it onto the acetate itself. Golden, I believe, actually inked these directly onto the acetate in the black, and then the rest of the stuff was also painted. So there's all hand-drawn artwork to these paintings, which it just makes them pop. I mean, I think he really felt like this is an animated TV show at this point in time. Let's take the animation and turn it into the comics. And this is Golden's attempt at bringing animation to a comic book cover. And these covers were all super memorable. I mean, I think 23 was, honestly my favorite out of all of them, but all these covers that were drawn this way are pretty fantastic.
So it's worth pointing out with this parallel, Chuck, that you're drawing to animation. When we think of animation cells, right? And just so everyone knows, that's spelled with 1 L, C-E-L. It's not spelled with 2 L's. Animation cells, until the 70s, right? Animation artwork's drawn in pencil on paper, and then a second artist redraws it in ink onto a clear celluloid. And then actually,
sometimes they'll draw it on paper and then they'll photocopy the black and white art, just then translated to the acetate.
Right. Hand drawn until Disney started using xerography in the 70s. And then the painted background is paint on top of a board or like a thick piece of paper, and then animation paint is painted onto the backside of the animation cell. And if you painted it on the top, then you create all these little shadows. If you can imagine when you spread peanut butter on bread, if you put it near a lamp, you're going to see all these shadows where the nooks and crannies are. But if you put, in this analogy, peanut butter on a window, and then you go outside and you look at the front of the window, you're just going to see the like smooth, solid sort of beige color. Golden had painted covers for Conan, and the reproduction was not great. I mean, painted in a normal way, just paint on board, like a Joe Jusko cover or an Earl Norham cover. And this more animation approach was going to work better. And what you see in the like weapons fire, where you have these soft edges, is airbrush. So Golden, I mean, publishers pay more for painted covers because they understand that painted covers take longer, and maybe it's a prestige project, or maybe it's going to sell better because it's sort of an eye-catching cover. So this is this is a lot of, in addition to being big and really well drawn, like we all know this is really well drawn. Like you can't say it enough, right? Because like there are very few artists besides Golden who could take a shape as strange as the cobra asp and show it as little of it as you see in this cover and from this angle, and yet still make it, one, recognizable, and two, like exciting and compelling and dangerous, right? Like I've tried to draw the cobra asp. It's not easy. And you want to draw it sort of like where you can see the whole thing. So, well, it's got these two clamps, and it's got like a tire, and there's a cockpit. It's got these two guns. Something else that Golden is doing here is he's bringing in atmospheric perspective. So any outlines that would normally be black, those are only for the shapes that are closest to us. And then all the outlines for the whale and the two rattlers in the sky, those are blue or blue-gray, and it knocks them back. So it's even more clear what is close to us and what is far from us. And then the background, the bottom layer, is just this really simple pink maroon with just a little bit of a gradient. It gets a little brighter at the bottom. Chuck, I suspect this might be 4 layers.
It's possible. I hate to take it out on camera right now to try to mess with it, but it's possible. I think there's like a base, like the base drawing is actually on board, and then there's multiple layers that have the planes and then the asp in the front. So, but the black, yeah, I agree with you, and I think he used the same approach as far as sort of defining the depth of each. When you look at 29, I think you've got Destro in the front of that cover and in very heavy black, and then sort of fades to sort of a lighter shades in the background to sort of give it a more 3D effect, which I think was also just very innovative. And I think, keeping in mind that, although Zeck was known for doing, say, the Punisher covers in airbrush later on in 1986, which they really did in 1985, this actually predates doing those covers. So Golden was a bit of ahead. Sienkiewicz, I guess, was also doing painted covers for Marvel for New Mutants in the early days as well. Again, I'd heard the story, you get paid more, so why not do a painted cover if you have the opportunity to do that. And I guess G.I. Joe was selling well enough at the time that Marvel probably felt it was worthwhile to invest in doing some great covers. So
as a kid, I was always sort of confused by the inconsistency of, some issues drawn by the regular artist and then a fill-in, some covers that are, the guy who's been doing all the covers, and then all of a sudden there'd be a cover like this, which is much fancier. But, this one was a TV ad, but it didn't always seem to line up with, an anniversary or a key story change. And I think that's the sort of day in, day out of editors lining up artists. It's like, okay, can you get me this cover? It's like, well, he's going to take 4 weeks to do that cover. I got to line up the next cover with someone else.
Well, and I think it goes back to this again was one that they were going to use on television. So it really needed to pop, and they needed to do that. But, back to your comment around Springer, now that I think about it, since that was also a Michael Golden cover, it was probably also like, wow, the cover is really fantastic. And then it's like, then you go to the inside. It was kind of like, sort of Vosberg on Punisher #5 when he took over for Zeck. It was like, wow, what a great Punisher cover on the front. And it's just like, this doesn't match to what you're sort of seeing as far as the art style. And I do think that juxtaposition of two different artists can sort of create that feeling of disappointment, as you were saying, even if the art is pretty strong by itself. So
I'm going to guess that Golden requested the colors for the logo an unusual yellow outline with that blue aqua fill for the 5 letters, because Golden would color his covers when he drew them, and of course he's coloring them when he's painting them. And then later, briefly in the 90s, he was a cover editor at Marvel, briefly. But this is an unusual cover for many reasons. Sort of the least of which is the unusual color treatment on the logo.
It is, and again, I think if you map Golden's covers, most of them were probably used in TV ads, and that's probably the reason that they are sort of sporadic through the run. And then it also makes sense too if they're talking about sort of, and kids have been watching the G.I. Joe animated series. The fact that you have animated covers that sort of go along with it is probably more consistent, and the thought would be gets them more excited about potentially reading the comics if there's more consistency to the TV shows.
I think it's probably worth pointing out as well the cropping of the cover as published removes a fair chunk of the actual published art. Like so we're missing, I guess, a big chunk of the second Rattler. You might not even notice that it's there. We're missing most of the detail down there of that right hand cannon on the whale. Some of the left, although there's less going on, and some of the bottom of the image, so we don't actually see his signature on the published cover as well. So it's lovely to see all of that extra detail that get lost, and even this lettering from the toy on the whale that he's painstakingly added in, as well as just recreating the G.I. Joe logo and that whale there as well. That's it's incredible detail, and I bet if you stick your face right up against it and squint at the detail on those individual characters of Snowjob and Torpedo there, it looks like there's just so much detail. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, really all classic. Golden was already known as sort of one of the artists. He was an artist that everybody else emulated at the time, and was really pushing what could be done here. And when you see all 4, I haven't seen the 23 in person. I did get a chance to see the 29 years ago, and I think Howie actually used to own the back cover to G.I. Joe Yearbook 1, which was also painted by Golden's, as well as the front cover. But they're very impressive, but they're obviously very hard to find any of these covers out there and still in the wild. And I can't even remember when I picked this up, at least 10 years ago at this point in time.
And is there a story about how you found this one?
I can't even remember. It may have even been an eBay purchase or an auction purchase. I almost feel like I bought it the second time around. I almost feel like it had traded hands once, and then I saw it come up again, and I felt like the second time around I couldn't pass it up. Now I think about it, I think there was an art dealer named Albert Moy who was working with Golden and selling some of these. So I think the 29, I had looked at it, and I think it's just, these covers weren't that cheap compared to other things. So they were an investment to get one, and I always hoped for the 23, and I think the 29 was around, and I like the 29 as well, and I think it sold, and I regretted the fact that I never made a move to buy it. And so I think when the 36 came up, I was just like, I've got to own one of these animated covers, and I'm just not sure when I'm going to get a chance to buy another one. So I think I jumped at the chance when this came up. So
sure.
I just want to say one last thing about the composition. We see just enough of the rocks and the ocean to sell the idea that this is a sea vehicle that's on the water, coming at us, aiming at a land vehicle. This is one of those. This is one of those things where I think because Golden is so good at composition, I wouldn't quite say he makes it look easy, but there's so much negative space in the sky because he's going to have a logo in a corner box, right? But he is so deftly placing things. Right, we see just enough of the whale to really know that it's the whale. We see just enough of the asp to really know that it's the asp. But we get this sort of, it's got to be really small, but we get all of that lower rattler. And in terms of camera placement, to use a movie term, and you don't want the whale to be smaller because then it's not going to have any impact. But if you were drawing comics and someone gave you this sentence, right, like whale with snow job and torpedo in the water coming up on the rocky beach where an asp with a Cobra officer in the cockpit is firing on them while 2 rattlers swoop down from the sky, right? Like you would have to do several sketches before you even came close to like getting it all in and also making it work.
Yeah. And then 99 out of 100 people would never get it as close to as being as good as this. Okay, are we ready to move on? And Chuck, are you okay to keep on plowing on as well?
Like I said, I'm all by myself tonight or today, so
okay,
we're good.
And we're always happy to keep on talking, Joe, particularly when we're looking at material as amazing as this.
I have to ask one more question, Chuck. Have you held the cover next to the painting and just gone back and forth to see how the color reproduced or how it's different in the original?
I don't think I've done a detailed color analysis on that. I guess when I see the original, it's like the blacks really pop just because they're hand drawn inks on the acetate and they're on the layer to the top. I mean, you can see right there that it's a little bit more. It's got more gradations of pink, on the final printed cover. It couldn't read that was the problem even at the time, is that they couldn't necessarily read as well even on some of these painted covers. So I always feel like as much, the printing had improved to some degree, but it still wasn't good enough to really truly reproduce these covers, these painted covers, whether it's this one or the Punisher 1 cover, really well. And so I think you lose some of the details. So I think I always remembered, frankly, that the printed one was a little bit more disappointing than when I saw the actual original itself. So that was part of the reason I was like, I got to own the original. What?
I've got mine here. Just
oh, there you go.
Having sticking my face up against it and seeing what's there, what's not.
Yeah, that's the problem. Sometimes you actually get disappointed in the final printed covers when you see them. And we'll see that with like 47 later on. But it's like some of the things they change is like, you made it worse.
I think for me it goes the opposite way, where a cover I don't like, I will like after I see the original art, because I'll sort of understand better what the artist was doing. Like Mike Zeck's cover to 44, like it's a good drawing. The cover really never did it for me. And then I held the original and I thought, oh, there's so much artistry here. And without the color, which was totally fine, sort of it just sort of, the original pulses, it breathes in front of me.
It's true. Sometimes the coloring can actually not do a service to the actual black and white art as well. But Mark, maybe we should move on to the next.
Next up, yeah.
I even forget. Oh, speaking of 47. Jeez, I always forget what order we're going in here and what we're talking about. So 47. So this is, I guess, the story that sort of continuing the early part of this conversation, which seems a long time ago. As far as when I met Mike Zeck in 1986, in January, right when the Punisher miniseries was coming out, and I had heard he was going to be at the show. I was set up with a deal. I was set up actually helping a dealer, a friend of mine, as a helper at this 3-day creation comic convention. And next to us was Mike Zeck and John Beatty. So I heard they were going to be at the show. G.I. Joe, at that point, I was all in. I was my favorite comic. And I think G.I. Joe 44 was just on the stands. So when Mike showed up, I was like, I hope he's got a G.I. Joe cover. I hope I can buy a G.I. Joe cover. I really hope he's got something. He showed up with the covers to 45, 46, and 47.
Mm.
And so I hadn't seen any of these covers. These had not hit the stands yet. And so I was like, he's like, can I buy one? And he's like, yep, you got first crack at which one do you want between 45, 46, and 47. And again, I was a teenager and didn't have any money. The price on all of them, I think, was $45 for each of them. So, but, I looked at how much money I had in my pocket and I was like, I could probably just get one of them. And so I had my choice. And, I wouldn't say stupidly, but in retrospect, I think most people probably would have chosen the 46 with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And as soon as I sort of landed on choosing this one, somebody else jumped in and bought that immediately, and I've never seen it since. But for me, it was the detail on the cover. And this is actually all Mike a lot of times worked with John Beatty at the time, but this is all actual Mike Zeck pencil and inking on it.
Oh, wow.
I just thought the detail on this cover was just so fantastic that was the one I chose. And then the 45, the dealer that I was actually set up with, who didn't buy original artwork, was just so happy with what he saw as well that he had to buy the 45 cover. And we sort of always had this deal. I was like, you bought that today for 45, but I'm going to buy that back, and I might even pay you $100 for it, in a few years. Give me the first chance at buying it back. Unfortunately, that dealer friend of mine passed away many, many, many years ago, and his widow has no idea what happened to the 45 cover. So it's out there, but unfortunately, we don't know where it is anymore. So of that day, the only one I took home with me was the 47, which is a great cover. But what's interesting about it, and I'll show you on the original, and I apologize, it's like I looked at this today, and it's like this is where seeing the what happens with rubber cement that was on the back of that has bled through on the acetate and left a stain. I'm going to have to go get my art restorative to fix that. But you'll see the original artwork that was underneath this. And when you when you compare it to what was published, because originally they had this logo on it, which is a lot, it goes down a lot further, and they decided, because of the Marvel 25th anniversary, they were going to cut the G.I. Joe logo and move up the corner box art. You can see they ended up redrawing the artwork when you see the published cover there. I don't know if you've got the side-by-side view of it anymore, but if you can show it against the published cover looks worse, because they ended up having to redraw it, and they didn't redraw it the same way Mike would have drawn it. So you lose a lot of the detail that Mike had in that original artwork because of the the edits that were happening after he had turned in the artwork there. But it was kind of the discussion I had with Mike after buying this. I guess the longer story was I spent the whole weekend with him. After that night, I went home, and I think I also wanted some Punisher artwork, so I ended up buying 2 pages from issue 2 of Punisher. I think it was page 1, and then where the guy gets his neck cut off in the Metro. But I went home that night, and I was like, Mom, I met this artist. I need to borrow some money. I need to borrow like I need like $300 or something. And Mike had offered to sell me all of Punisher 2 for $300, for an additional $300. Like, Mom, I gotta buy this. I just love it, and I love his art. I gotta buy it. So I borrowed that. I had to pay my mom back all summer for the money I had borrowed by mowing lawns the rest of the summer, but I was able to walk home with this and then all of Punisher 2 after that convention. But the great thing was, from a G.I. Joe perspective, I was like, Mike, does anybody, what do you do with the artwork if you're not going to a comic show? He's like, well, honestly, just sort of sits there. Nobody really cares about my G.I. Joe artwork. So if you want to buy it, just call me up every month and just let me know you want it, and I'll put it aside for you and mail it down to you. So that started my relationship with Mike of buying his G.I. Joe covers as he was doing them. But didn't get all of them, unfortunately. Mike got into, I think, the ones right after this, the 48, the 49, and 50. He ended up going to a poker match in Florida, I heard, and losing the bet, and so he had to pay off his debt with the covers to 47, 48, and 49. And ironically, I worked, and Tim, you may know that. Do you ever go to Another World in Georgetown?
Oh, yes.
Yes. So I used to work at Another World in Georgetown, and my boss, Steve Milo, had somehow bought the covers from Mike, and we ended up giving them away as we did a promotion with, I think it was B97, if I remember. We had a radio station there, and we had all these artists. It was Valiant was really big, and I can't remember why we gave away G.I. Joe covers, but the grand prize, we had a raffle that day, and we gave away the covers to all 3 of those issues of 40, 48, 49, and 50. So I didn't get those issues right away, and then it wasn't until later that I got issue 52. Because Byrne did 51, if you remember that, correct? So, but this was it. This was great, and like I said, it was my starting to really collect the G.I. Joe covers as much as I could.
And how old would you have been at this point?
What year was this? What is there a publication year on this?
This is 86 because it's
I guess it would have been January of 86. So I would have been 15, just turned 15 at the time.
And what hats off to your parents for loaning you the money to buy these, because we were just talking just off air before we started that just last week there was a brand new record set for a Zeck interior Punisher page, which if I'm remembering correctly was $33,000 for a page. So I think your mum's return on investment is probably not too bad.
Yeah, so that if that's a sign, that was a page from issue 4 of the limited series sold for that much, which I guess I used to own that page at one point and had sold that to a collector as well. But yeah, I guess Punisher art is that, and then there's actually Craven's Last Hunt art that sold in a similar range a few weeks before that. So yeah, Zeck art seems to be hot these days. I guess I bet on one of the hot artists back when I was a teenager, but for me, it's really, it's funny. Years later, Mike was like, we were talking in the early maybe 2000s, and Mike was like, "Do you still have all that GI Joe art you bought for me?" He's like, "By now you must have sold it, because the covers were, I think they'd gone up to like $400, $500. He's like, you'd be stupid not to have sold them." Like, nope, Mike, I still have every single cover I ever bought from you. And he's like,
foolishly holding on to those. Yeah.
He's like, okay, and now he's always like, "You're a pretty smart guy." I wish I had kept some of my own artwork, but in some ways, but he's, I was always that kid that, again, I never did it out of a place of, I'm going to make a ton of money off of this stuff. I just bought it because I really liked it, and frankly thought it was money that might be wasted, so to speak, because there was no price guide for original art. Didn't seem to be anybody else collecting it, because you were sort of in your own silo at these conventions when you were buying it from these artists. You were ever wondering, because everybody else would look at you, as we talked about earlier, it's like you look at you sideways of like, what is this? Why are you buying it? It was a foreign concept in the 80s to buy original art from artists and think that it might actually go up in value at some point in time.
Well, and one more question. So you were having these conversations with Mike on the phone, and he was describing upcoming covers and whether you'd want to buy them or not. Yes. Were there any that he described to you and you thought, what, maybe that one's not for me, I'm going to pass?
Not of GI Joe covers, and I don't think it was usually his descriptions. I remember, like, I would talk to him when he was just started on Batman. He was doing the 10 Nights of the Beast, and he was like, this Batman 417 cover, for folks that look at it, and now it's a classic cover. And he was just lamenting to me. He's like, I think I'm spending too much time drawing the backgrounds that I'm not getting. It's like, I'm not making any money because I'm spending way too much time on this cover. But now it's like an all-time classic cover, and the original. I don't own the original art to that one. I have a different Batman cover, but that would probably at least easily be over $100,000 for that cover today. No, I don't think there was any GI Joe covers that I passed up because of the description of it. I later passed on it because again, I was paying for covers, they were $40 to $50 depending on how much Mike liked the cover. But he. At that same show, he got introduced to, I guess, Jim Warden, who was a dealer, a friend of mine as well. He came over and met Mike as well, and then ultimately became Mike's agent. And then I think it was around issue 50. It was in the later 50s that he took over as Zeck's art agent, and then the prices went up to $75 a cover. And I was like, I'm out. I was like, I'm in for paying $40 to $50 a cover, but when I have to pay $75, I can't afford this anymore. So I really stopped buying Mike's covers sort of towards the end of the run. I bought a lot of the special missions covers as they were coming out, just to sort of keep the run going on that. But like 59 and 60, I remember, were $75, and I was like, I don't think I can pay that for these. It's just too much for me.
As a young guy, 15, 16, you're not going to have huge amounts of spare cash sloshing about. Mowing lawns only pays so much, I guess. I
got about $10 a lawn, so that was, and I do like two to three lawns a month.
5 lawns equals one Zeck cover.
So part of the comparison here, that 40 or 50 was a lot then to buy a cover, and was a lot for a young person to spend. An artist drawing a cover for Marvel in the mid 80s would have been paid 200, 300.
I don't know the page rate, but that would probably be like a cover penciling, yeah. Because even inking like interior pages was probably like more like $75 to 150, depending on who you were. But
yeah, so in 99, I knew a guy who was penciling at Dark Horse, and he was saying like, oh, the Marvel starting rate is like $100 per pencil for pencils, and it hasn't really changed in a long time. So part of the like you're spending so much money, and like from nowadays, like, oh my gosh, Chuck, you're not spending a lot of money. You know, Zeck has already made, for what was the time, good money for these covers.
Yeah.
And he's making maybe half of it back for just like clearing it out of his home, where these stacks of pages and covers are just taking up space.
That's correct. I mean, they honestly looked at it as, they go to a convention, it was kind of drinking money, right? If they could sell any artwork at the show. They were actually doing sketches at the time. And at that point, when I met Hama, he wasn't charging for sketches, but Zeck would regularly charge maybe $25 to do like a figure sketch. Maybe it was 50 or 40. So, to commission an artist even to do a sketch at that point in time was almost as much as buying a published cover. But a lot of people like this idea that you could ask the artist to draw whatever whatever you wanted. And so people were willing to pay almost as much as what they could pay for a cover because of that privilege. And I always looked at it as, frankly, what made an impact to me was the published book itself. So I'd rather have the example of the published book. And so going back to our very first sort of discussion here, I've always sort of opted for the published stuff because when I read it, it makes an impact on me, where it's always nice to share that experience with an artist. But again, I've had the privilege of sort of hanging out with these guys a lot. So I don't feel like that's the only connection I have to these artists, where many people walk away, never see the person again, and that's all they have to remember their experience of meeting that artist.
And I guess the aspect of that, parity of payment of a commission versus buying a cover as well is that particularly back then, where the original art didn't seem, wasn't really particularly valued very, very much. It's like, I'm going to have to, if I'm doing a commission, it's taking me time. That's my time. I want to be reimbursed for that time. Whereas the original art, and particularly, panel pages of a book, for example, rather than something a bit flashier, it's just a byproduct of the production process of creating a comic. It doesn't actually really have any value in itself. So if that's everywhere, everyone in the market is behaving with that mentality that it's almost throwaway, doesn't have a value, then you can kind of understand the things where it was back then.
The one observation I want to make about the cover to 47 is that this is how you draw machine guns firing, with that shape, with that yellow, with that red.
Well, Zeck became the gun guy, so to speak. I mean, I think he always took pride in the fact that he actually researched the guns. He had, magazines at the time, because you couldn't go on the internet and find all this stuff, but he would have just gun magazines lying all over the place, and, became the guy that could draw machinery, whether it's this or the Punisher or anybody holding a gun. I think he ultimately did like Merc and stuff, but it was because his ability to draw people firing guns and or the guns themselves so well that he got those jobs. I mean, the G.I. Joe 43 cover, Tim, you got to admit that machine gun blast, pretty fantastic with Death holding that.
Yes.
Pretty
Yes, it
fantastic.
Is. Yes, it
okay,
is.
Next up, we have
All
got
right.
Trimpy again, Special Missions #1, page 19.
Yeah, so I think let's start with the artwork on this, and then there is a backstory to this. But I mean, here's an example where Trimpy was drawing special missions, and I think compared to what we showed earlier with his initial designs for what was going on with G.I. Joe, a very different style, a very much more detailed style, not as heavy black. I mean, there is some black and white to it, but it's not as blocky as it was. And I think as a kid, I would say this was a little off-putting to me, in that it didn't match to the style I was used to seeing in the comics those days. And I guess it had evolved even from the early Trimpy days to, at that point, was it Ron Wagner that was drawing, I guess, around that same time? He was the regular artist. But, it had gone through this whole progression of all the artists we just talked through. And ultimately, you can see that Trimpe adapted his style. And I think that's the thing that also people don't realize about Herb, is that he was somebody that could adapt his style over time. Towards the end of his career, he was drawing like Rob Liefeld because that was the new Marvel style. That was what was popular at Marvel. And as much as that wasn't his natural style, he adapted to that. So given that Special Missions, I think, was intended to be a more real world book, you can see that he's using a more real world style to drawing the characters here. That is, not a little different to that. And I didn't like it at first, and it's kind of like, Steve Ditko's art on Doctor Strange or other things, but you do learn to appreciate it over time. And I guess I'll pause and see Tim and Mark, reaction from you on Special Missions.
Yeah, so the Special Missions was previewed in issue 50, so I think issue 1 came out shortly after that. So it would have been Rod Wiggum who would have been penciling the main book at that stage as the contemporary for it. And yeah, issue number 1 of Special Missions I experienced as the reprint in Action Force, which is how I experienced a lot of my first encounters with the Larry Hama G.I. Joe work. And yeah, I was really quite taken with it. It was I don't know if I can put my finger on it exactly, but yeah, it definitely left a big impression on me, particularly that first issue. I really did enjoy it, and definitely did make a big impression on me at the time when I first encountered it.
My first issue of Special Missions was the final issue, which I bought new at a bookstore right before a road trip. Special Missions is my desert island comic. If I could only bring one run with me, I would actually not bring Marvel G.I. Joe 1 through 155. I'd bring Special Missions. It's satisfying in a different way because as much as I love the ongoing sort of soap opera of G.I. Joe, you don't have to worry about it in Special Missions. And as much as I love Cobra, having the Joes contend with other bad guys is a real treat. And I'm a big fan of the 22-page self-contained story. Chuck, you make a point here about Trimpe taking on influences, and his work on Fantastic Four Unlimited at the end of his sort of regular comics drawing. He came back for a couple like special projects. He drew, some pages for Hulk and for Savage Dragon, but the end of his sort of regular career at Marvel looked really different. I am seeing a little bit. Is this Breckhoff? Is this Colonel Breckhoff in the final panel?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a tiny bit of Michael Golden in there.
I am too. Yeah.
And I think what happened after Yearbook 2 was published is that anytime the October Guard showed up, Larry Hama or the editor on Joe would make sure that whoever was drawing the characters had some reference from Yearbook 2, because that was sort of now definitive. But there's a little bit of cartooning in that big chin, and there's a little bit more sort of rounded in the cheeks than I would expect from Trimpe. What strikes me about this page, and this is what I love about G.I. Joe Special Missions and also G.I. Joe and also 80s Marvel Comics, is that Mark, if you go back to the full image, if you could, there is so much writing going on, right? There's a lot of dialogue, but it's not onerous and it's not ponderous. It's not a slog to get through, right? Like there is a famous X-Men writer who wrote a lot of dialogue, and
John Byrne.
Those are great stories. I love the plots. The scripts are a little bit much for me, and I've never felt that way reading a G.I. Joe story. And Special Missions, because the first page we're often thrown right into the middle of it, and because Hama often has to sort of inform the reader, who's probably a 10-year-old kid in the 1980s, of what's going on, right? It's like, okay, there's a hijacking situation, and this is how this this old airplane works, and there's also like a satellite or a submarine or some terrorists, but it's not Cobra. And so you get in sort of the exposition, and I don't mean like a mission brief at the beginning, and 1 or 2 issues I think did that, but I look at this page and I see, and I mean this as a compliment, I see old school comics where there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 panels, although the configuration, it sort of works like 7 panels. There is no like big glamour shot of anything, right? Like as a page, if you were looking on eBay or Comic Art Fans or an auction site, and if you saw this page, you'd buy this because you have to own something G.I. Joe or Special Missions or a Trimpy. But you wouldn't buy this page because it's like the most exciting submarine or the most exciting vehicle that Trimpy drew. Like this is, it's page 20
19.
Okay. This is right. Thank you. On the bottom. So this is like doing the work of telling the story. You know, this is not that Vosberg splash page with Venom, Snake Eyes, and Quinn, which kind of acts as a second cover. And even like a G.I. Joe story now compared to 1986, 1987, when this was published, a G.I. Joe story now, even with the same writer, you're probably not going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels. Although sometimes you do, but sort of less often than I think you would have then. And, you know, my dollar is valuable. So give me a lot happening on every page. And as exciting as it is to turn the page and there's some like amazing 2-page splash of like Spider-Man swinging through the city or, you know, whatever it is. I'm much more interested in all of the things that happen here, right? It's like, that's a Cobra sub surfacing off our starboard bow. Like, yes, tell me more.
So Chuck,
Yeah,
I think you've.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, you think you've got quite a few Trimpy pages. So in terms of when you were making your selection for today, what was it about this particular page that called out you
I
for
haven't gotten the
inclusion?
story behind the story on this one, but yeah, there is a story behind the story. So you know, obviously, I had when G.I. Joe Special Missions 1 came out, Mike Zeck had told me about drawing the cover, and he was like, "Yeah, I got some guys kind of coming down off the ship. It's kind of cool." And I was like, "Okay." So do you want to buy it? And I'm like, "Sure, I'll buy it." And it's like, you know, I bought it sight unseen, so I had the cover. And then, you know, as I got to meet Herb, you know, I'd asked him what he had kept, and you know, he had not kept any of the original G.I. Joe run that he had done for A Real American Hero. That was all sold. He, frankly, after he got all the art back from Marvel, he sold that to a comic book dealer, you know, for like $1 a page, and they just got everything of his, including his G.I. Joe, all his Hulk, everything. And so, but he had kept the Special Mission stuff because, frankly, he liked it so much. And I think, you know, Tim, if that's your Desert Island, if you go back and look at that run, almost every splash page or everything that you sort of see there is a plane. Herb loved to draw. That aviation was his love. Like if he could go out and fly a plane, that was his dream. And I think it was issue 14 where it's like he draws. I think he's even in the story himself of Special Missions. It's just about, you know, biplanes and all that kind of stuff. That is his passion. And I believe there must have been a conversation. It was like, look, if I'm going to come back and draw G.I. Joe, I'm going to draw what I want. And I want to draw a plane in every single story. And so when you look at every single Special Mission story, you will probably find a plane almost in every single one of those, because that's what Herb loved to draw. But he had special love for those Special Mission stories. And so he was like, I did keep it. You know, I wanted to keep those because honestly, the fans don't appreciate my Special Missions artwork as much as they don't value it as much as they do those early issues. And so at the time, and this, when I started talking to him, was maybe 10 years ago at this point, you know, I think he was saying, it's like, I want $175 a page for my artwork, but people are only willing to pay me like $100 a page or something like that. And it's just not worth it for me to sell it. I'd rather just keep it. So he had kept the Special Mission stories to himself for many, many years. But what happened was, I think it was like somebody in his family it goes back to Howie Welsh. Howie had wanted a page from G.I. Joe Special Missions 1. So they pulled a page out of Special Missions 1, which was this page, and had sold it to Howie at a convention many years ago. And when Herb found out about that, he was furious because he was like, I wanted to keep, like, that book needed to stay intact. It was like, it was his pride and joy. He's like, I can't believe that there's a page missing out of this complete book, and it was sold. And he was furious. It was always the one thing that he sort of regretted. And so then, you know, years later, after Herb had passed, again, I was in contact with the family, but one of the family members had the rest of the pages from G.I. Joe Special Missions #1. And they actually put it on eBay is how I found out that they were selling it. So I actually contacted them through eBay and said, hey, can I just buy the complete book? And I think they had listed it at, a high enough price that nobody had put a bid on it yet. And so I think they just sold it to me directly. But I was able to get all the pages except for the one page that Howie had. So, I knew Howie had this page, and, afterwards was working with Howie to, to work out a trade so that I could reunite the book. Because this is after Herb had passed. And I was like, honestly, Howie knew as well that was always Herb's one regret, that this page had gotten sold. And so we were working on a deal. And then, frankly, everything went dark for a while. And I wasn't sure what had happened. And Howie, for those that know, he passed away. He was in an unfortunate accident. And so in the middle of this deal, I didn't know that he had passed away. And so that's why I was not hearing back from Howie as to how we could complete the deal so I could get this page. All the pages ended up in Howie's collection ended up in another collector's collection. And I got a hold of that collector and explained the situation to him and said, look, I'd still like to reunite this page back with the story. And so he and I were able to work out a trade deal so that he got some things from me. And I was able to get this page. So, I felt years later that, sort of justice was served. Hopefully Herb up there is, happy that the pages all got reunited together as a complete book, so that hopefully it won't get split up again, even when I pass away, and that, for future generations will get to enjoy this book wherever it may go.
There was a time when Trimpy and his dealer were selling Special Missions pages. It was like a couple a week on eBay for months. And I got 2 of them, and they weren't favorites. They looked great. And I hadn't anything from Special Missions. And it is a great regret of mine that when IDW reprinted Special Missions in those 4 paperbacks, they did so seemingly by scanning the printed comics, stripping the color, and then recoloring them. And the reproduction looks bad. Whereas around that time, Trimpy was selling his art, and it's not that, you ask him to scan them or ask his agent to scan them or put out an APB amongst the collectors. It's like, can anyone contribute scans of pages? And I have a hard time looking at those 4 Special Missions reprints from IDW, as much as I love what IDW has done with and for G.I. Joe. Yeah. So seeing an original always makes me happy, because this is what it's supposed to look like. And that's, someday maybe they'll do a new edition of those books and, contact the fans who have pages and ask for scans.
Yeah,
I hope so. I've offered mine up to them. So if they need to do a Special Missions book, there's enough to do a complete artist edition. But I think fans out there need to demand it. So go to IDW and demand, yo Joe, go demand a G.I. Joe IDW artist edition.
When I met her in 2013 in London, I asked him about what he had left, and I think it was literally maybe 1 or 2 pages of Special Missions that he had left at that point, or at least with him. I might be conflating things. Maybe he had more, but back home in the States. And yeah, I think he just had with him 1 page from Special Missions 4, which didn't feature any G.I. Joes or Cobras on the page itself. So I didn't pick it up. I probably should have, but
yeah, 4 was not, for whatever reason, 4 wasn't complete. I think he may not have done the inking on 4 or something along those lines, because the ones that typically got sold to him were the ones that he didn't do the inking on, so he didn't have complete books. I think the complete books Herb had tried to keep, at least the early ones. He had tried to keep to himself, because he had done, similar to Vosberg, he really appreciated the fact that he could do his own penciling and inking on those books. And Mark, it may be, frankly, when I had an event at my house in Maryland in 2010, and Tim, sorry that I didn't invite you. But Herb, what I usually had comic art get-togethers, and so I'd invite all the comic art collectors in the local area up, and I'd try to get an artist to show up. And Herb lived up in New York at the time. But since he was, frankly, a good friend, he drove all the way down from New York with Patricia, his wife, and they ended up doing another local show that weekend as well. But he just came down to sort of hang out, talk to everybody, But I had asked him if that was the first time. I was like, could I buy one of your special missions books? And he sold me all of issue 2, which the story to issue 2. Again, also own the Zeck cover to that, which is sitting right back there. But the 2 was always similar to 1. 1 was my favorite, but he wasn't willing to sell the 1 at that point, and maybe it was because it was was not complete. But it was all, or I think maybe he'd already given it to one of his kids. But the 2 reminded me of the original issue 2 in some ways. The storyline was very similar. There was sort of the sense that the villain got, sort of the retribution that they deserved at the very end, and sort of that same sort of feeling. So that's why I always was drawn to Special Missions 2, similar to, the Real American Hero number 2 as well. But yeah, I think after that I had bought most of the complete books that he still, because I appreciated him, and I was willing to pay his price, I think, around what he was asking for them at the time. So I'm glad that that I could get them before. Frankly, they didn't get a lot on eBay. I think people didn't, because they were flooded to the market, they were going for maybe $50 a page or something like that. So they're very affordable to the people that bought them. But felt like it also maybe they were worth a little bit more, and I think they are, especially now today. So I think Joe fans probably appreciate them more than they did back then.
I often have to remind myself that Special Missions was initially bi-monthly. It was published every other month. And it wasn't until around 15, 18 that it went monthly. And, like I was reading comics. I got into comics right as it was ending. So I sort of had no say in it as a fan writing a letter or giving them my dollar. But sort of retroactively, I always wonder, if only it had been monthly the whole time. And then by the time it ended the month that it did, there would have been 12 or 15 more issues I could have. Special Missions would have ended at like 39 or 42. And who would have done another fill-in if Trimpe had done a couple issues by himself and then missed one, because there were a couple fill-ins along the way.
There were. Yeah.
But alas, what would the Andy Kubert cover for the final issues have looked like, if not a bunch of vehicles? Alas, that does not exist. I can't rewrite time.
Okay. So the next one is, funnily enough, it's something that we have talked about relatively recently, me and Tim, because we do a Devil's Due podcast discussion show where we've gone back and started reading the issues and discussing them, starting with issue 1, and now we're up to issue 5. 25, sorry. And yeah, this was something that we looked at and discussed, and the process around it and the way it looked, and what I might have been. So with that vague preamble done, I'll move on to what it actually. Oh no! I've gone. I'm introducing the wrong thing. Can I skip ahead?
Well,
to the thing
I like you built up to it, so when we do get to it, we can stick with this. Oh, there we go.
There we go. This is the thing that I was actually talking about. I was getting too far ahead of myself. This one, David Michael Beck, back cover to G.I. Joe 8 from Devil's Due. So there's a story behind it.
Yeah, I mean the story behind this. When Devil's Due launched the quote unquote new G.I. Joe series in the early 2000s, that had been the first time, frankly, as an art collector, that I had sort of taken more interest in even looking at what new art was coming out. And David Michael Beck's versions that he was doing on those back covers were just some classic portraits. That Snake Eyes and the Storm Shadow that he did, the Cobra Commander that he did on issue 4, all blew me away. There's some, those are the ones there's ones I like better than others, but those particular ones were pretty awesome. And then I guess sort of my final great favorite was this cover of the Baroness, or the back cover, excuse me, to issue 8. So when I met David, so it's interesting on even on the Devil's Due artwork, when that was going up for sale, the first time I remember it for sale from these early issues, I think issues 1 and 2 and 3, I was at a con down in Florida. I think it was I don't know, not Florida SuperCon, but whatever the big con down in Florida was back in the early 2000s. and they had put some pages of the interior art by was it Steve Kurth, I think it was doing this stuff for them. Those were up for sale in a charity auction. So the first, I guess, Devil's Due art I got was that. But, you know, frankly, after owning those for a little while, it wasn't as exciting to me as maybe the original G.I. Joe art, but then these David Michael Becks were. So I ran into Beck at a convention, I believe in Philadelphia, and I don't believe he was, I asked him about whether he was willing to sell these final paintings, and at the time he was not. He was very much like holding on to them for dear life. Because of, I mean, frankly, he puts a lot of work into it. I think, you know, David's work it was bought by other sort of, I would say, well-known collectors, but, you know, was in some things. So I think he was probably hesitant to let the final paintings go. But what he did have, and we'll show in just a second, was he had the preliminary rejected version of this cover for sale. And when I saw that, I was just like, this was one of my favorite covers. Even seeing the rejected version of this, I was blown away by that. And so immediately bought that. When I got to the final cover, I think after buying the rejected cover, I stayed in touch with him. And I think a year or two later, he did agree to sell me the final version of this cover as well. And then, you know, frankly, it's just beautiful. It's on illustration board. Just amazing, just painted piece. You know, he has sort of an interesting sort of like crosshatch style where he does a lot of the work he does the underwork as if it was like pencil and ink, and then he will sort of layer on the painting on top of it, which gives a very sort of stylistic, a different style to it than you would see on a traditional sort of painted cover. You know, what we saw with Michael Golden or, you know, a Joe Jusko, as you were saying. I think his style is very much different, but the lighting, the highlights, and the, you know, and her hair, the fact that it's just glowing, the glistening on the gun, and even the symmetry of the steps in this one just contribute just in the belt buckle. I mean, not to mention her shape, but I think as we will see in just a second with the preliminary version of it, actually the shape of it I thought was actually a little bit better in the original version of it. This was the slightly edited version of it that was a little bit more stayed, if you want to look at it as far as her pose. But just, you know, all the elements on this, just a fantastic, you know, painting to me, and was, you know, sort of my once and done. Although I did have other David Michael Becks over the years, this is the one that I've decided to keep over all the years.
And what I mean, looking at this is really blown up with all of the detail. One of the things that I'm noticing is that he's painted every single brick individually on that building in the background, which I think is just an indicator of the amount of time that he must have spent on producing this, and some of the fine detail in like the hairline of the Baroness as well, that just isn't picked up in reproduction. That kind of fine detail. Have you got this one in front of you somewhere?
I do not. I think it's actually upstairs, unfortunately. I apologize, guys, but
what sort of scale would this one be? Is this
it's a little larger. It's a little larger than normal sized art. It's you know, I don't know, I can't give you that, but it's bigger than normal art. It's on illustration board, so it's very hard, because you would paint this on that, and you got to make sure that the paint doesn't curl the paper. So both this and the one that the pencils that we'll show in just a bit were also both done on an illustration board, sort of to their full amount. And even the detail of the fact that, like, you know, it goes all the way to the edge. I guess he probably taped off the edges to make sure that it didn't bleed, but it's just clean and crisp. I mean, it shows how neat, as an artist, he's very neat and tidy, which, you know, sometimes you'll see stuff on the sides, like, you know, ink blotches and all that, just to show that they were in a rush to do this. But David, you know, took his time to paint these things here. So, but great, you know, great artist. I my big regret, I guess, is the Cobra Commander painting. He was holding on to that for many years and then put it up for sale. And I wish I had bought that. And frankly, even the Storm Shadow and the Snake Eyes, I wish I had bought those as well. So I've tried to contact the owner of I've been in contact with the owner of the Snake Eyes for many years, and he's just decided he wants to keep it. Just as much as I love this painting, he loves that painting. And they're all, you know, that era of sort of rebooting G.I. Joe and some of the stuff that they did with these, especially these back covers, just amazing. I think he's very much an underappreciated artist. I mean, the value of his art has not really gone up significantly because I think really only the Joe collectors have gotten to see and appreciate a lot of this. I think he does a lot of other varied projects that don't get him as much notoriety. But Beck was one of the greater Joe artists in my opinion, especially when you think about the fact that this was a relatively dead property. In the early 2000s, they really had to sort of bring it back from out of the dead, and they relaunched it in such a great way.
Shall we have a look at the pencils?
Yes,
would have
so
been?
we can see what Hasbro did not like about the original drawing. There we go. So pretty much the same composition, except as you notice, the hips are in a very different position than they were on the final drawing of this. And from my understanding, and I guess first, even before we even get into that, I think just to appreciate this is how Beck would start. Oop, am I still there? Mark, can you hear? Or Tim, can you hear us?
I can hear. I can hear you.
Okay. I think our screens are dead, but I'll talk over it. Okay, we're back. Okay. This is the I guess the first layer of what Beck would do relative to his paintings. So he would always start with a very detailed pencil drawing of these, and then, like I said, as he would work up from that and build up the painting from this stage of things. But my understanding is this was given to Hasbro for approval. They felt like the sway of her hips was too sexually, I guess, too much of a sexual innuendo, that they had Beck straighten out the hips in the final version of that. But I think it, the cover that would have been, and I think actually somebody for a commission actually commissioned Beck to finalize and do a version of this painting, a smaller version of this painting, sort of in its form, and it looks great. I mean, I actually like the original better in some ways, but also understand Hasbro's, especially given that they were relaunching the brand and the fact that they were still trying to keep it toy centric, that it might be a little too much for Hasbro, especially in those early days.
And like hearing some of the things that Josh Blaylock has sort of described about those early days at Devil's Due, that the contacts at Hasbro didn't always necessarily understand the brand or the characters that well, and we're still in that mentality of this is a kid's toy rather than a nostalgic book for the adults the young adults who had grown up reading G.I. Joe in the 80s and 90s, and so I think we're pushing back on some of the more mature elements that he wanted to have in the book at that time.
Yeah,
it's interesting that the Baroness is a sexy character, and I'm all for women in comics being posed in a more neutral way, or the way that a man might be posed, and you see a lot of poses in covers and in interiors where an artist draws a female character in a way that they would never draw a male character, and sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's funny. But the Baroness has always been a sexy character, and you can absolutely draw the Baroness in a not sort of at all sexy pose, but she arrives fully formed with a little bit of baggage, and that she is a sexy character. And I can imagine that Cobra Commander sitting in a throne, Storm Shadow holding a sword, is just not going to come under that kind of scrutiny. This is definitely a pose, like a man is not going to, there would never be a Destro drawing where he's taking this pose, right? Like no artist would draw that. And if they did, readers would not like it, and they may know why they don't like it, or they may not know why they don't like it. So I appreciate sort of Hasbro's pushback here. I agree with both of you that the original is a more interesting drawing. It's really wonderful to make the comparison. And previously, Mark had on another episode pulled up that commission, right?
Yeah, the painted version of this one. Yeah.
Yeah. But Chuck, Mark, and I, and our excuse me, and our other co-host have talked a little bit about the sort of phenomenon of the sexy Scarlet cover or the sexy Baroness cover, which shows up in the last 10 years sometimes for variants.
Yeah.
And
Well, especially like Mike Mayhew's version of this nowadays would be par for the course for any of those covers. And it's interesting to put this in reference of the early 2000s, that this was not acceptable, that this was going too far. Well, in today's world, you could do a cover like this all day long if you really wanted to, because not only, I think it's because the competition's doing it too. You see this on Marvel, you see this on everything else. I think it's a little bit within context of what are other folks doing to sort of push the boundaries on their IP. And would they do this with the Black Widow? Yeah, the answer is probably yes in today's world. Or, they've done it with, a number of other female characters. But I think in the early 2000s, Lady Death and maybe some of those others, but you weren't seeing it on the mainstream characters per se. And I think you also have to remember that Beck was also drawing for he was drawing like Lady Death and other things at that time. So for him, it was probably okay to, it was just the translation of other things that he had done for other publishers. And, it shows a little bit of the fact that when you have to go through the approval process, you might lose some of that creativity that you would want or you expect out of an independent publisher.
do you want to go back to the
let me
slide we skipped?
I got a little bit overexcited and I skipped a slide. So let's skip that.
Really like that image, didn't you? Yeah, I guess. So the story behind this one. So a little later, and I think we were talking about Trimpe before, and this sort of talking about my relationship with Herb is after Herb passed away. Patricia, his wife, moved out here to California, nearby to me, and I guess I had the pleasure, but also the sadness of helping her to sell the remaining art that was in Herb's collection, as well as some of his comics. And so we, there was a number of pieces that we ended up selling, publicly to a lot of folks, and I'm glad that they ended up with, collectors that really enjoy them. Frankly, there wasn't a lot that I ended up wanting to keep for myself, but this was, I'd always wanted this particular cover from Herb. And I think while he was alive, I had asked him about it, and I don't even know if he just didn't get around to pulling it out for me or didn't know he had it or what it was. But this was one that I was quite surprised to find in his collection of artwork when he had passed away. So I asked Patricia if I could purchase this one, and was lucky enough to be able to. But a couple of interesting things. Here again, you see the sketch cover that was published by Hama, who did the layouts for this. And again, a very true to, it looks like a Herb Trimpe drawing that we would expect, but it is obviously based off of a Hama sketch there that was submitted and given to Herb to essentially, work from. So, great to continue, however many years later, you see that the formula of how Hama was sort of translating the covers was still coming to fruition here, even in the rebooted IDW, issue 169 versus issue 10. But what was more interesting to me about this was also something else that I had found in Herb. I guess it was sort of something I noticed when I saw the cover. Is, if you can zoom in on this, is that it's signed Beto at the very bottom on the like the pouch
down here. Oh, here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's signed Beto. And so what I was wondering, I was like, what is that? Because I believe it's Gilbert Hernandez of Love and Rockets. That was the name that he had used as an artist, was Beto. And so my original thought was, did Herb actually ink this, or did he have it inked by one of the was somebody, the Hernandez brothers? And I asked Patricia, because the other thing that I found was this. Here's a copy of G.I. Joe, #1, signed Beto. And I was like, why would, even if one of the Hernandezes had worked as an inker, why would he sign a copy of G.I. Joe #1? That makes no sense to me. But this was in Herb's personal collection of comics when he died. And so I guess I'll turn it to you guys. Do you know the story behind this?
No.
I do not. No.
It was an odd story. So Patricia told me that they were on a vacation I believe in South. I can't remember if it was in Latin America or if it was in Mexico. I apologize for not knowing the details. And this is sort of a little bit of a telephone game, but I believe he was talking to, they were on vacation at like maybe a resort, and they were talking to one of the waitresses there. And at the time, I think Herb was joking around, and I think they wanted to come up with a name that was appropriate for him in the country. And they're like, "Oh, you look like a Beto." And so from then on, he had adopted this name Beto as his name. And funny part is he started using it as his professional name without maybe people even realizing that. And the fact that he had signed a copy of G.I. Joe 1 with the name Beto at some very specific point in his career, I'd never seen any of these other ones. This may be the only signed G.I. Joe that is signed Beto. Maybe it was a fan that was like, gave it to him and was like, "Can you sign this?" And he signed it Beto. And they're like, "What is this? Who's Beto?" And maybe they gave it to him because they're like, "I don't want a comic saying Beto." I don't know exactly how this got signed Beto, but it had always been a mystery. But it was a name that if you look at some of those other covers from that time period, you'll notice they are all signed Beto. And that was Herb's pen name that he had adopted for a very brief period, sort of towards the late part of his career.
Huh. That's fascinating.
And Mark, I apologize to Patricia if I got part of that story wrong and or if I wasn't supposed to tell part of that story. But I thought it was interesting for fans out there that do notice that some of these things are signed Beto.
Part of why this cover feels unusual is that we've never seen Trimpe only once. We've only seen Trimpe draw Snake Eyes version 2.
Oh, right.
I should say 3
119,
times.
I believe, right?
No, that's version. That's version 4.
Version 4.
We've seen Trimpe draws in the first year of G.I. Joe, and that's version 1, of course. Then he comes back. That issue you just mentioned that he wrote Andrew. That's Snake Eyes version 4, and he drew the pinup. He penciled the pinup in Order of Battle 2, the cover of Order of Battle 2. And he must have penciled Special Missions 14 and 15, right?
And he must have done then the reprint edition, the trade paperback of Order of Battle may have had him on that. I don't remember. I used to own that, but
do you mean the new cover? That's Ron.
They did a new cover, a wraparound cover for Order of Battle.
If you're thinking of Roadblock kicking in the door, that's Ron Wagner.
No, it's like a big one with like it's got like all the characters.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm thinking of Special Missions. Right, you are the Order of Battle. But in terms of our like collective fan memory of Trimpe as this associated with G.I. Joe artist, it's Rod Wiggum and Ron Wagner who were drawing Snake Eyes version 2, and Snake Eyes version 2 is a lot of people's favorite. And so to get Trimpe later in his career when G.I. Joe has come back. And it's just Snake Eyes. It's not Snake Eyes and a bunch of other guys. He's not half blocked by a tree. I remember when this first came out, sort of in the back of it was this little tickle in the back of my mind. It's like, well, this is exciting and special, but it's more than just, a cool drawing of Snake Eyes version 2. There's something else going on here. Oh, right. Trimpe's sort of never done this kind of drawing. And it also, it very subtly recalls Zeck's cover to 53.
Which is the 25th anniversary covers.
Yes, which is a different angle and a different cropping. But again, in terms of like, how many times has a Spider-Man cover just been like Spider-Man's head or his head and shoulders? Many, many times. How many times has a G.I. Joe cover been that for Snake Eyes? Twice.
And maybe this one as well.
Oh yeah. Thank you. When they go to San Diego Comic-Con, they go to Comic-Con International.
There's something about this cover that you might not be aware of, Chuck. So I'll play something, and I wonder if it's a surprise to you to see. So for the Snake Eyes movie, they've made a number of promotional videos of spotlighting a particular character.
Okay.
And the way that these videos typically run is it will open with a striking image of that character, a few other comic book images, and then into the movie. So I'll just play a little clip, which might be fun for you to see.
Yeah.
was quite quick.
I had not
So
seen that.
I will. I
I'm
will
gonna go right now. Get my
play.
tickets.
I'll
I'm
play
gonna be right
that
back.
very beginning bit again for you to see if you. There you go. So it starts. It's the very beginning of that video. Starts in with
I had not seen that particular
with
one.
your cover image.
I do. Yeah, it's making me more excited to see the movie. But no, glad to see that this cover lived on, because it was it a variant cover? It wasn't even like, was it the main?
I'm
I
not
guess it
hearing
was the
any
main cover.
audio. Can you guys hear each other?
Oh.
Thumbs up if you can hear.
I can hear both of you.
My side.
I can hear. Can you not hear
Let
me?
me just click on this a second and see if that resolves it for me.
Can you hear me?
Can I hear you? No.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Mark.
People at home can hear us.
You guys keep on going then.
You can just.
And I'll see if I can resolve.
Tim, can you hear me?
Yes. I'm going to put in the chat. Mark, go to next slide.
Flick on to the next image, perhaps.
There he goes. He's reading my mind.
There we go.
All right, so I'll pretend to be Mark. Chuck, this is page photocopy of pencils from a Mike Zeck issue of The Devil's Due G.I. Joe, silent issue 21. It's too Irish. I know you must have a big story about issue 21, drawn by Mike Zeck, penciled by Mike Zeck. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so when Mike got the call from Devil's Due to do the covers, he started with issue 6, and I wish I had bought that Cobra Commander cover that he first had. I think we put those all on eBay, or I suggested Mike put those all on eBay. And I'd own some of those, but Mike got reintroduced to the G.I. Joe universe as his final, and this was actually G.I. Joe 21. It's hard to believe however many. When was this? 2003, I believe. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, almost 20 years, 18 years at this point. That's really crazy to me. But this was his last published, continuity book that he had drawn, and still is to this day. He has not gone back to drawing anything. So this is sort of Mike Zeck's leaving comics issue. And for this, they decided to bring Mike and John Beatty, who was the original inker on a lot of those G.I. Joe covers, together. And for this project, Beatty, and we'll see some of the ink pages in a bit, but Beatty really took a different style that he had been using lately, in that he wanted to go back to sort of the feathering and things that he had done in the 1980s to make this issue feel more like a classic G.I. Joe issue that they did. So, Mike and John had started working on this. They had told me that they got the assignment of doing the second version of the silent, or third version, if you want to look at it, of the silent issue as an homage to the original G.I. Joe 21. And they were, similar to years past, I always sort of calling Mike up every week and sort of checking the progress of things and understanding what it was. And in one of those conversations, he was like, "Hey, I've got all this artwork that I'm drawing for this. Do you want to buy it?" And I was just like, even before it was drawn, and I was just like, sounds good. I was like, I haven't seen it sight unseen. I'll buy it, whatever it is. And so that was sort of week 1 of the project, as I had agreed to buy it. And they're like, "Great, we know we're getting some extra money out of this, so we can put some extra effort into this issue." So then by, as they were getting into it, I think maybe it was week 2, or I think it was maybe week 3, because I think I waited a week. And then I was like, "Hey, Mike, since I'm buying this issue, is there any way that you could sort of work me into the issue? I mean, it'd be nice to have something." And so you'll notice through the issues that there's an arcade that's featured on there. And there's no words. I mean, this is the problem, is they actually have no actual word bubbles. So they can't say, "Hey, Chuck Costas, how you doing?" So they subtly put it in there by calling the arcade Costas Corners Arcade. So if you look through the book, you'll see many references to Costas Corners Arcade, although the Costas part is blocked out in this particular page. And then, I called them up. Then I was like, "Okay, that's great. It's great. I'm glad you got that in." And then the following week, I was like, "Well, it would be nice if maybe I could be a character in the book as well." And they're like, "Yeah, I wish you would have told me that before we started drawing the whole book, because we're on page 18 at this point. It's pretty late in the book to try to get you into the book, but we'll see what we can do." So here was the page that they were sort of stuck on when I made my request of making a cameo appearance in the book. And so if you zoom into that top panel, you'll see sort of in front of Costas Corners Cafe, you'll see a gentleman, I believe, in a I think it was a Captain America shirt that maybe that person's wearing, or there's just a person behind Billy there that's sort of rooting on. Oh, actually, no, the Captain America is off to the left a little bit. So he's got a gang of kids, and so they decided that was where they could sort of hide me, I guess, in the crowd, so to speak. So I guess we can move to the next page. So this was the pencil version of it. The next page is the ink. So you'll notice that the character next to Billy got redone, and they decided to put me in a Punisher t-shirt in there. Mm-hmm. But if you zoom in close, this was Mike and John's attempt to draw me freestyle, using reference, of course, but this was all sort of their pen and ink. And I think Mike and John thought that my hair was a little. I mean, I've plumped out a little bit since then. I'll let the audience know that I've gotten a little rounder since those early days and the picture that I gave them to reference. But I think they felt like maybe the hair was a little bit too scraggly or whatever else. So they decided that they needed to use a little bit of Photoshop after the fact to make it look more like an actual likeness of me. And so if you move on to the next page. This is if you blow up, you'll see that they sort of tightened up really just sort of the likeness of me to make it look a little bit more realistic. And that's at least how I used to look maybe almost 20 years ago when they were drawing this thing. But the subtle Punisher t-shirt, since I had bought a lot of Mike's Punisher artwork as well, which was a nice touch that, borderlines on copyright infringement. But who was looking at it?
Chuck,
Marvel. Hopefully my friends at Marvel aren't watching right now.
I shared this anecdote with you when we were emailing a couple of years ago, but I read the first year of the Devil's Due series, and then I dropped the book, but I came back for issue 21 because it was a big deal, and I was very excited. And when I got to this page, I thought, I don't know who that is, but that's someone.
Yes, that was me. Yeah, you could see the detail that I guess. But I hate to say it, when they colorized it, you couldn't really tell all the detail that was in this. It's really only the black and white version of this that you can sort of see all the details in there. But yeah, that was my one cameo. I didn't stick around in the issue, but I can at least now say that I was an official. I don't call it G.I. Joe character, but I was officially in an issue of G.I. Joe. I did not make it into the latest Snake Eyes movie, as far as I know. But I think
your code name is Bystander.
Yes, Bystander Punisher T-shirt.
So
yes.
we'll work on a toy package profile image with an explosion behind it. It can be you with your Punisher shirt. Are you a blue jeans guy?
We'll do blue jeans. So that sounds
okay.
Good.
What kind of shoes? Sneakers?
Let's go with some of those Cobra shoes that came out a few years ago. That would be sneakers. Yeah.
And then what? A portfolio case under your arm, or a novelty brush with ink on it?
Maybe a movie prop. I don't know. Something like that.
Hasbro can save money by just reusing the Mars briefcase.
There we go.
From the Rise of Cobra.
Mars briefcase
Figures, right? And in the story, it's like, well, you're the collector, and that's the prop.
I am the collector. Yes. Well, I like to think of the backstory as I'm the arcade owner of Costas Corners Arcade, and I'm stepping out to see what's going on, and I'm really happy to see Snake Eyes kicking some butt there. So it's a cameo from the Costas Corners Arcade.
I'm shocked that that codename Bystander is so pleased that this small section of Los Angeles or San Francisco is getting torched.
I'm happy. I'm just happy to see my hero. I'm just like, wow, Snake Eyes, he's in front of me. I can't believe this is happening. I'm just a small arcade owner that owns Costas Corners. Look at all this. Look, my place is trashed, but hey, at least it was done by Snake Eyes and the cast and crew that all came out to be in my comic book today. So
he's a Punisher. Yeah. He's a Punisher fan. He just wants to see the world.
Well, everybody else got punished in this issue. So, but yeah, so that's the history of my cameo appearance in G.I. Joe number 21.
And you have all of the inked pages in your.
I do. I used to have all the prelim pages. I sold those off to another collector. But kept all the pages, and that actually brings me back to sort of the Ringling exhibit that we're going to be doing at the Ringling College of Art and Design, and it's going to start October 18th through the December 10th. we worked out with Hasbro that we'll have all those pages on display so that people can read the entire Silent story front to back on one wall over there, as well as every single G.I. Joe Mike Zeck cover and major piece that I own. So if you want to take a trip down to Sarasota, Florida sometime this winter, it'd be a good place for Joe fans to go and check out that exhibit. Hopefully it'll be something that people will remember. And it's frankly the first time I've gotten to put that much Joe art up. I don't have that much wall space, as you can see in this little segment.
Is there a place that people should be, typing into Google to find out the details of this one, or is it a wait and see to get the full scoop once?
I think it's a little bit of an early scoop for you guys. I don't think it's been officially announced even on their website that it's coming, but it is, from what I've been told, it's starting October 18th and going through December 10th. And frankly, right as soon as I get done with this, I need to pull all the artwork off the walls and put it and get it ready for the art person to ship down to Florida so they can start getting it ready for the exhibit later on this year. So, but I had done an exhibit of Mike Zeck's art, including some of the G.I. Joe stuff, in 2014 at the Cartoon Art Museum that was at that point in downtown San Francisco.
I was going to say, Chuck, you probably know Andrew Farago.
I do. Yes.
So my wife and I, she has family near San Francisco, and we were in the city, and we were, I think we were like looking up comic book stores and like places to get coffee and food. And she said, isn't that a comic museum here? And we found it on her phone, and we got there, and the like marquee or the sort of stencil in the window, it's like the art of Mike Zeck. And I was like, what? Because we hadn't planned the trip into the city with anything in particular, like, oh, we'll see a friend of mine from college and we'll go to a comic book store or two. And and we went inside, and the date on the pamphlet or the placard, the show, it had run like 3 months, and the show had ended the day before. Oh. And I have this this comes after the sort of famous meme of like Darth Vader from the Star Wars prequel yelling no, but sort of in my mind, collectively I have that, and I have Riker from that season 1 episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation saying damn it to hell, and I'm just sort of ready to get down on my knees and say no. And we sort of looked in, and the person at the desk said, oh, the show's actually up for another 2 days because we're not taking it down immediately. And I turned to my wife, and she's an illustrator and she appreciates comics, and she's like, yes, let's go in. So there's all this Punisher stuff, and like the Secret Wars 1 cover, and some Kraven's Last Hunt, and there's like a big stencil on the wall, as museums do, and just a bunch of G.I. Joe work. Was the Yearbook 3 cover in that show?
I think I did lend the Yearbook 3 cover to that exhibit. Yes.
And Mark, I seem to have some anxiety when it comes to feeling G.I. Joe when I'm in California, because I think we only had 30 minutes because we had to hop the train back to family for dinner, or it was 4:00 and the museum was closing at 5. I think they were doing an art lessons for younger people in sort of the room off the lobby, and I would have gladly just stayed there for 2 hours and just stared at each one and talked about it to my wife like we're doing now, and pulled out my sketchbook. And so I had enough time, but I was a little rushed, but I was so pleased that we had made it. And it was all serendipity because we hadn't looked into what do we do in the city? Is there some dream exhibit that shouldn't exist on paper? It's like, Tim, what's your fantasy art exhibit if you're going to stumble into it's Mike Zeck, all his covers and pages from Marvel. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad it hit home. It was a great exhibit to put on. If you go out on eBay, you can probably find a copy of the old book we made for that called Raw Fury that has some of the G.I. Joe stuff got snuck into there. For this one, like I said, we're officially doing this alongside with Hasbro's blessing, so we can put a whole bunch of G.I. Joe art up there, and the people can appreciate that. But yeah, appreciate you guys taking the time to go through at least samples of my collection. I think that, like I said, a larger part will be there, but you guys got me thinking as well with G.I. Joe hitting its 40th anniversary. Hadn't thought of it. Andrew and I had always talked about doing a G.I. Joe exhibit when there was a major anniversary for G.I. Joe, and I hadn't thought about there's much more than I have than just Mike Zeck stuff in my collection. So maybe there's some stuff I can lend out to make an even bigger exhibit somewhere else that will make Joe fans happy on a very large anniversary. I think 40 years of the 1982 Joes is going to be big for the franchise.
Will you attend the opening of the exhibit?
I will. Yes, we will allegedly be there on October 18th. I'm still seeing if Mike's going to be in the country, Zeck that is, to also come down. But if he is, likely he'll come visit as well.
Is there any talk of him giving a lecture or just sort of being there for more than just the opening sort of cocktail reception?
Yeah, frankly, we haven't worked it out. I think we have to first figure out if Mike's going to be in the country, because he was planning on before COVID going out of the country for a prolonged period of time and still hasn't been able to get out of the country. So I think it'll just depend on when the borders open up and when he's able to go on. He's now technically retired, so he wants to enjoy his retirement a little bit. So if he's there, otherwise I may see if there's either I'll probably give some kind of speech or we'll have some other folks that may have worked with him over the years there to give something. But I'm hoping Mike will be there, and we'll try. We're also trying to get some video out of him too to add to the exhibit to make it a little bit more virtual than that the 2014 exhibit was. I think now there's things that hopefully we can do a little bit more high tech than what we had back in those days. So anyway, but it's been lovely going through the stacks of artwork, and I'm even learning new things about pieces that I own because I haven't frankly taken them out to appreciate them, and I'm glad we got a chance to do that today, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you for being so generous in terms of sharing both your collection, but also your time. Yeah, it's been a delight looking at this art in some detail, and yeah, it's sort of very generous of you to share both your art and your time. So
my pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. For our viewers, it's not just the hours that Chuck's been live with us talking. It's also him culling and scanning and emailing and agreeing. On behalf of Mark and I, and also our many viewers, Chuck, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Your enthusiasm is clear, and as fans, I think we're lucky. I mean, you're lucky that you bought some of the stuff when you did, like how forward thinking of you. But as fans, in a way, we're lucky that a lot of this stuff is safe because you got it and it's on a wall, it's in a portfolio, and it didn't get lost or it didn't get sort of sold and sort of disappear.
Yeah, and I think if there are things I can contribute to, I know I help Marvel out all the time, and if there's things I can do with Hasbro, I'm more than happy to do that as well. And hopefully I'll make renew some of my contacts over at Hasbro this year as I'm working with them down on the Ringling exhibit to see what we can do potentially next year. And just like you guys, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that Snake Eyes movie in just a few short weeks. So I'm excited about that. So hopefully it'll. We'll all go back 2 or 3 times, but it'll be our reintroduction to the movie theaters, I think, for many of us.
Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to promote or plug while we've got you, Chuck, before we wrap up?
No, like I said, I think for those that see for those that are interested in Marvel art as well, like I said, I'm helping with the Marvel Universe of Superheroes exhibit that's traveling. It's going from this right now. It's in Chicago. It's going to be going, I think, later in November out to Columbus, Ohio, for those that might be in the Midwest. Come visit that, but it gives you some more insight into sort of original art like this, as well as movie props, although Marvel oriented versus the G.I. Joe stuff. What else we've got for those that are in Los Angeles that happen to be watching this? Another thing that I sort of work on in my spare time is we started a convention that used to be the weekend before San Diego Comic-Con. It's under Torpedo Comics, TorpedoCon as they call it. That will be coming up I think the 25th, I believe, that weekend, 3 days. So helping John Del Mayan and the Torpedo guys with that as far as attracting folks for that. But that's got a great guest list, including Frank Miller, Jim Lee, Frank Cho, Bill Sienkiewicz, some guys you may have heard of that will be showing up at the show. So if you're in Los Angeles, you've been looking for a comic show to go to, please check that out.
And Chuck, you have a comic art fans page.
I do. Yeah, you can look under Charles Costas. That's my alternate name, not guy in background that's outside of Costas Corners Arcade all the time. Bystander. Sorry, I forget my name sometimes. I'm getting older. Sometimes I go by Beto. I don't know why. But no, I do have comic art fans. You're welcome to check that out. And I do occasionally, help artists out with art sales of things. I think, if you're a fan of Mike Vosberg, we talked about some of his. You can go to his website, which is Voz Art, I believe. And VOZ, he goes by these days. He changed his name as well from Voss, VOS, to VOZ. But yeah, I mean, I think what I have always appreciated is, frankly, the variety of different artists. We talked about many of them today. There are other ones that are in my collection, such as Jeff Isherwood or John Byrne, or there's other artists that worked on these early Joes and even today's Joes. There's a whole host of different folks that have sort of carried on the tradition, and I think it lives. We owe it to them to sort of thank them for their hard work on this, of sort of creating the universe that we love here. And hopefully my collection and us talking about them today can help them live on in everybody's hearts. And I, my fondest to the Trempe family. I think Herb was an amazing artist, amazing friend, and an amazing person, and that many people interacted with. And I know there's many other folks out there as well that I need to say thank you to. And but Larry as well, and everybody's been great to me over the years as far as approaching them as a fan and getting to know them as an artist. And I hope many of you out there, don't be intimidated. I think all these creators are very, when you talk to them, whether it's Ron Rudat or Herb or Don Perlin or whoever it is, I think they appreciate that you appreciate their work. So say thank you and keep them all in our hearts.
Excellent. And Tim, if people want to find out more about you and what you do in your little world of G.I. Joe, where would they go?
My website is arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent. And if you want to find out more about Talking Joe and the show in general, there is a place to go where we've got the links to everything. That is talkingjoe.co.uk. Big thanks to all of our Patreon contributors as well. I'll give them a shout out. Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, thank you for keeping the lights on. And I think that is almost us done. But there is something that we say at the end. It is, when all is said and done, you can catch us down the road.
Because we've been talking Joe. Like we haven't been doing this for months.
You've been Chuck Costas, and we're not out of your art because I think we barely scratched the surface, but we are out of time, and currently we are all out of Joes. Thanks to everyone. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks to everyone sticking with us and enjoying the show. Look forward to next time.